Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You've wandered into a very niche, but oddly dreamy corner of history. This one's part royal court gossip, part psychotropic stroll through centuries past, and, let's be honest, part what were they even smoking? You're about to tour the medieval world from the hazy heights of the royal elite, where incense swirls, flowered tinctures bubble, and the line between sacred ritual and recreational indulgence gets seriously blurry. You probably won't survive this, not because there's danger exactly, though, yeah, some of these ancient brews could kill you, but because you're a commoner stepping into places where kings and queens let their guards down. And sometimes they're sanity. It's not all jewelled goblets and fur-trimmed cloaks. Sometimes it's a half-lit chamber, a hidden pipe, and a monarch giggling at the ceiling beams. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I don't want any pity clicks. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Bonus points if you tell me what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in a hallway. Stone walls, torches crackling, the occasional whiff of something musky you can't quite name. You're deep in a medieval palace, though which one, you're not entirely sure. There's something dreamlike about this place. You turn a corner and the scent intensifies. Clove, maybe? No, something more bitter, like henbane crushed underfoot. A servant scurries past, eyes wide, clearly avoiding a certain door. Naturally, you head straight for it. The chamber inside is dimly lit. Thick smoke coils in the air like lazy spirits. At the centre, a noble, perhaps a minor prince or an idle duke, leans back on a velvet divan, exhaling slowly from a long curved pipe. He doesn't look surprised to see you. In fact, he barely looks at you at all. His gaze drifts upward, toward the ceiling, as if the meaning of a life is hidden in the shadowy rafters. Welcome to the late 13th century, where imported herbs from the East are just starting to trickle into the European courts. Not everyone's on board, some see it as dangerous, heretical even, but curiosity always finds a crack. Crusaders brought back more than just relics and stories. They brought seeds, literally. Cannabis, opium, hashish, exotic spices with side effects that weren't strictly culinary. This early moment, the one you're standing in now, is the prelude to centuries of secret indulgence. You edge closer, pretending to admire a nearby tapestry. It depicts a hunt, but the stag's eyes look suspiciously human. You glance back at the noble. He's muttering something about golden trees in the wind, which, given that you're indoors and the windows are shuttered, probably isn't literal. One historical account, frustratingly vague as so many are, tells of an English lord whose manor stank perpetually of strange eastern leaf. Chroniclers wrote around the issue, using euphemisms like clouded mind or soporific vices, but you know what's up. The man had a stash, probably a good one, and he wasn't alone. The church, meanwhile, was torn. On one hand, intoxication was seen as a pathway to temptation. On the other hand, if monks could drink themselves silly on ale brewed in silence, who was to say a bit of herb now and then was any worse, especially if it was wrapped in spiritual language? Visions, they'd say. Meditative clarity. Sure, brother. Let's go with that. You step outside the chamber, and the air hits different. Cooler, cleaner, less complicated. A nearby window lets in moonlight, and for a moment you think you hear music. Not harp strings or lutes, something softer, almost like humming. You follow it, because that's what we do here. We chase the weird. Down a spiral staircase and into another hall, you find an older woman, maybe a lady in waiting, standing beside a brazier. She's tossing herbs into the flames, muttering prayers. Lavender, mugwort, a bit of poppy seed. You recognise the scent now. It's sleepy, ancient. She notices you but says nothing, just nods. Some royalty didn't indulge directly, they surrounded themselves with it instead. An ambient haze of herb and oil, for dreams, for balance, for forgetting the things they couldn't control. You start to see a pattern here. These weren't parties, not always. Sometimes getting high was the only escape for someone born into a crown they didn't ask for. Imagine ruling a kingdom with chronic migraines and no Tylenol, or dealing with betrayal, plague, and siege while trying to keep a 1,000-year-old bloodline from collapsing. That pipe starts to make more sense, doesn't it? Here's your quirky fact of the night. Some medieval courts used pigeons to smuggle psychoactive herbs between castles. Little satchels tied to their legs, flapping through fog and arrows alike. One unlucky falconer recorded finding a dazed pigeon near a tower in Gascony, bag still attached, filled with what he called sleeping hay. No one questioned it too hard. Of course, historians debate all of this. Some argue that the presence of these substances doesn't prove widespread use, that it was medicinal, ritual, symbolic. But the evidence piles up. Pipes in buried chambers, residues on goblets, poetry that makes no earthly sense unless someone was very relaxed when they wrote it. There's still a tug of war between the skeptical scholars and the ones more willing to read between the lines. But tonight, we're leaning in, deep into that smoke. Back in the hallway, you press onward. Every corner feels like it might reveal another chamber, another royal, another layer of this strange, secret culture. The farther you go, the stranger the architecture gets. Ceilings curve in unexpected ways, tapestries shimmer like they're alive, and the hum of unseen music never quite fades. You're not in Kansas anymore, and you were never really in England to begin with. You're floating between courts, slipping through timelines, one perfumed door at a time. The scent changes before the architecture does. That same winding stone corridor suddenly fills with something heavier, sweet and sharp, all at once, like overripe dates soaked in incense. You blink, and now the walls are carved with intricate floral patterns, curling vines, and lion heads with open mouths. There are no torches here, only oil lamps, their flickering glow casting gold across inlaid tiles. You've crossed continents somehow, without ever lifting your feet. Welcome to the Middle East, somewhere near the peak of the Islamic Golden Age. And more importantly, welcome to the domain of the original high-functioning hashish connoisseurs. You pass under a wide archway and into a courtyard. Palm trees stretch lazily toward a violet sky. Fountains gurgle, and beyond them, a pavilion glows with music and laughter. There's a man reclined beneath silk canopies, reclining like he's made of honey and clouds. His robe is embroidered with verses of poetry and gold thread. He's not a sultan, yet, but he's got the confidence of one, and he's giggling. That kind of slow, full-bodied laugh that doesn't belong in the world of war councils and tax edicts. He's telling a story, something about a flying horse and a talking fish, and his guests are hanging on every ridiculous word. This, you quickly realise, is a hashish party. Now, historically speaking, hashish has a complicated place in medieval Islamic culture. On paper, it's forbidden, like wine and other intoxicants, but in practice, let's just say enforcement was inconsistent, especially behind palace walls. Many nobles and poets used it to open the mind, to soften the edges of reality, to visit dreamscapes otherwise barred to the waking world. Sufi mystics sometimes framed it as a tool to reach divine ecstasy, while rulers often just appreciated the calm vibe. The man before you has clearly leaned into that latter category, and here's where it gets wild. You've probably heard the word assassin before. Deadly cloaked figures from legend. What you may not know is that the word may trace back to Hashashin, followers of Hassan Isaba, a shadowy figure who led a mountain stronghold in Persia. His followers were said to partake in ritual hashish before carrying out their missions, believing they were stepping into paradise itself. Scholars still argue over how much of that is slander from rival factions, but the association stuck hard. High men with knives, deadly and euphoric. But tonight, the only danger in the air is the potential for someone to start philosophizing too hard. The Sultan in waiting reaches for a carved wooden pipe and exhales a ribbon of thick, scented smoke. He starts talking about the stars, how they might actually be tiny holes in the sky, letting light from a more perfect world shine through. You nod along. Honestly, it makes a weird kind of sense. Someone brings out food. Pistachios, figs, sweetmeats dripping with honey. You weren't hungry 5 minutes ago, but now you're devouring them like a royal feast. One of the men beside you leans in and murmurs that these delights were likely made with a touch of majoon, a dense hash-infused paste mixed with dates and spices. It was a delicacy, served in tiny portions that packed a surprisingly surreal punch. The sweetness masks the magic, but the effect? That'll roll in soon. Let's pivot to a fringe fact. There's at least one written account from the 11th century describing a ruler who claimed to ride a tiger into the clouds after ingesting too much majoon. Whether it's metaphor, madness, or just a very strong batch, it gives you an idea of the power these concoctions held. Royal apothecaries walked a tightrope, create bliss, not chaos. Outside the courtyard, the call to prayer echoes faintly. The laughter quiets for a moment and everyone sits with their thoughts. The smoke lingers. You feel it pressing gently around your temples like a silk turban you don't remember putting on. Your feet sink slightly into the patterned rug beneath you, and it occurs to you how intentional this all is. This space wasn't just for getting high, it was designed to enhance it. The textures, the geometry, the sounds. It's like stepping into the inside of someone's most soothing dream. But not everyone approved. There were waves of backlash throughout the centuries, religious leaders who cracked down on what they saw as decadence. Several sultans banned hashish outright, ordering the destruction of gardens where the plant was grown. Others, like the Mamluk rulers of Egypt, punished public users while continuing their own private indulgences behind mosaic-covered doors. It's a classic story. Rules for thee, but not for me. You find yourself watching the man at the centre again. He's not just a stoner noble lounging in comfort. He's thinking, deeply. He speaks now of justice, of his dreams for a kingdom where art and science are valued alongside conquest. And then, without warning, he laughs again, louder this time, and says something about a dancing camel. The moment's gone, just like that. It's easy to dismiss these rulers as idle hedonists, but many of them were also patrons of the arts, protectors of libraries, lovers of geometry, philosophy, medicine. Their altered states didn't always make them worse at ruling. Sometimes they made them better, or at least more interesting. There's a debate that still circles academic circles today. Did these substances spark enlightenment, or distract from it? Did they deepen spirituality or cheapen it? You're sitting in the middle of that. Debate right now, a fig in one hand, your mind buzzing gently around the idea that maybe, just maybe, both things can be true. Eventually the party starts to wind down. People recline further, eyes half closed, drifting towards sleep. The fountains gurgle on. One of the musicians switches to a quieter rhythm, barely a whisper on the strings. The man in the golden robe leans back and sighs. In dreams, he says, we're all kings. You're pretty sure he's quoting someone, or no one, maybe himself. You take one last look around. The moonlight has changed, higher now, paler. You stand up, feet a little unsure, head full of fragrance and fragmented thoughts. As you step out of the courtyard, the world folds again. The floral tiles become stone slabs. The sweet smoke fades into cool air. The courtyard is gone, but something in your chest feels softer, like your breath found a different rhythm there. One kingdom down. Many hazy thrones to go. You're back in Europe now, but just barely. The sea salt clings to your skin, and the winds are sharp, but inland the land softens. Rolling hills, vineyards twisting over old stone walls, and castle towers that loom like they've seen too much. You found yourself in the heart of 12th century Aquitaine, and the halls here echo with laughter, lute strings, and the sharp snap of someone not taking nonsense from anyone. This is the domain of Queen Eleanor. Yes, that Eleanor, Duchess, Queen, and at one point prisoner. But tonight she's not locked in a tower. She's reclined in her solar velvet robe draped like a storm cloud, and she's sipping something suspiciously strong from a tiny silver cup. You slip past the threshold, and immediately the air feels heavier, sweet with frankincense, but also something darker, earthy and spicy. At her side sits a small wooden cabinet, carved with roses, locked with a tiny iron key, and rumour has it that inside is the finest collection of opium tinctures this side of the Mediterranean. Eleanor, you quickly gather, is not a queen who needs permission to medicate, or to elevate. She raises an eyebrow at your presence but doesn't wave you off. Instead, she gestures subtly toward the hearth, where an alchemist in soft leather gloves stirs something viscous over low flame. The queen likes her comforts calculated. Not just wine, not just herbs, but carefully measured mixtures brought from her time in the Holy Lands. She learned a few things during the Second Crusade, not just about strategy, but about trade, and that included how to get her hands on Persian poppies. You settle onto a cushioned bench near the wall, acting like you belong. Her ladies-in-waiting flutter around, their laughter light, but their eyes tired. They've had this tonic too. You can tell. Their movements are slow, graceful, dreamy, as if everything's underwater. One is reciting a poem in Occitan, something about a bird who sings until it forgets it's caged. The others nod, solemnly, and then they giggle. It's that kind of night. Now, history books usually skip over this part. They'll talk about Eleanor's marriages, to Louis VII of France, and later to Henry II of England. They'll mention her beauty, her intellect, her political cunning. But they rarely mention her private apothecary, or her rumoured fondness for elixirs of repose, which is how her court physician described it in one extremely nervous letter. But think about it. This is a woman who spent decades being underestimated, shuffled between kingdoms, watched over, controlled. You don't survive that without a few rituals of your own. And that little cabinet, according to one fringe account from a dismissed monk who observed it through the keyhole, it held more than just opium. The drawer below, he claimed, contained ground henbane and dried belladonna berries, poisonous in the wrong hands, but in the right tincture and the right dose, a gateway to visions. The monk may have been trying to smear her name, or he may have just been jealous he wasn't invited. Tonight, Eleanor pours another tiny dose. She stirs it into honeyed wine with a silver rod, watches it swirl and sip slowly. Her eyes close just briefly. And then she speaks, not to you, but to the fire. There are dreams where I am no one, she says, and they are my favourite dreams. No one in the room responds, because how do you answer that? The line between medicine and mind-altering blur in this room, and you start to understand why the church never really knew what to do with women like Eleanor. She wasn't dangerous because she rebelled. She was dangerous because she understood. She knew how to bend things, laws, hearts, herbs, to her will. Some chroniclers called her restless, others irrational. But maybe what they were really describing was someone just a little ahead of her time, and maybe a little bit high. Here's a historical nugget to tuck into your brain folds. Opium in medieval Europe was often smuggled in under the name sleeping spice. Apothecaries would disguise it with layers of other ingredients, rosewater, clove, even crushed pearls, to sneak it past customs. Wealthy nobles like Eleanor didn't buy it from back-alley dealers. They funded entire caravans to fetch the raw goods. The Queen's agents were known to meet with traders in Italian ports, exchanging gold for poppy resin wrapped in linen and wax. But of course, not everyone saw this as elegant. Open debates raged among court physicians. One faction believed these compounds were miraculous, God-given tools for managing pain, melancholy, and even prophecy. Another group warned that they clouded the soul, weakening resolve and moral clarity. Some claimed that prolonged use led to delusions, even madness. The truth probably lived somewhere in between, depending on the user, the dose, and the reasons behind the ritual. Eleanor, though, didn't strike you as mad. If anything, she's the only one here who seems fully in control. She listens to every sound in the room, the creak of the floorboards, the soft clink of cups, like a general reviewing her troops. She may be gliding on a fog of imported opiates, but her mind is razor-sharp beneath it. Her words are precise, her silences even more so. The fire crackles louder now, and one of the ladies rises to open a shuttered window. Cold air pours in, and for a second you can almost see the warmth escaping like spirit vapour. Eleanor exhales and smiles, not at anyone, but at the night itself. Somewhere down in the village, a bell tolls. Midnight, maybe. Or maybe time doesn't mean quite the same thing in this room. You start to notice little details. The embroidery on her sleeves isn't just decorative, it's symbolic. Tiny stars, crescent moons, vines that curl in spirals, protective symbols, dream symbols. If this is a trip, it's one she's curated to the last stitch. Even the candles are scented. Something herbal with a touch of laudanum. Eventually she turns to you. Not with surprise, but like she's known you were here the whole time. "Tell me," she says, voice soft but firm, "what would you do if no one was watching?" The question hangs there, thick as the smoke curling from the hearth, and then she looks away, back into the fire, as if your answer is already known. You don't stay much longer. Something about her gaze makes you feel like you've read a page not meant for your eyes. You step back through the stone arch, back into the corridor, the door clicking softly shut behind you. The air cools. Your mind still floats, and somewhere far behind you, a queen drifts off into sleep, guarded not by soldiers, but by dreams. It's the middle of the night now, or it feels like it. You're not keeping track anymore. Time in these halls slips sideways, like candle wax sliding off a tilted sconce. The floor beneath your feet grows smoother, colder. Stone gives way to marble. Mosaics creep along the walls like vines, and domes rise above your head as if the ceiling itself has begun to breathe. You've crossed into the glittering realm of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire at its height, a place where gold leaf is used like flour and secrets swirl in every shaded alcove. This isn't some sleepy backwater monarchy. This is the edge of the world and the centre of it all at once. Here indulgence isn't hidden, it's ornamental. You find yourself walking through a colonnade lit by hanging lamps filled with rose oil. The scent is thick, sickly sweet, and underneath it lingers something smoky, more primitive, more ancient. You follow it to a side chamber just off the royal baths. A party is underway, if you can call it that. There's no music, no dancing, just a slow-moving cluster of courtiers, nobles, and one rather serene-looking empress draped in layers of silk and attitude. She sits reclined on a low couch, holding a goblet of wine so dark it might as well be ink. Her eyes are half-lidded, and so is her mind. The Byzantines knew their substances. Opium, hashish, fermented honey wines, yes. But the real high of choice here? Wine spiked with a rotating roster of add-ins, henbane, mandrake, myrrh, sometimes poppy syrup depending on the mood. They didn't always know exactly what they were doing, but trial and error in the imperial court was considered part of the fun. And it wasn't just the commoners sipping this stuff under bridges, it was emperors, empresses, priests, generals. If the concoction was good enough, it earned a name. If it was really good, it earned a secret recipe scroll locked in the palace vault. Tonight's drink of choice? Mulled wine laced with divine drops. A euphemism you've come to recognise for something strong enough to make time melt and the stars hum. You accept a silver goblet from a too-polite servant and take a cautious sip. It tastes like cloves, copper, and regret. But your stomach warms instantly. And your thoughts? They stretch like cats in the sun. The Empress raises her goblet toward you, but she doesn't smile. She's watching something behind you, something that's not actually there. "He rides a lion," she murmurs, and his voice is thunder, but he weeps when he sings. You nod slowly, because what else can you do? The man beside her, a scholar maybe, or just someone rich enough to act like one, starts reciting from Homer. But the rhythm is all wrong. It's as if the words are swimming upstream, trying to escape his mouth. Here's a historical nugget that often gets swept under the velvet rug. Several Byzantine emperors maintained private apothecaries not for treating illness, but for enhancing visions of insight. Emperor Heraclius, according to a somewhat suspect Armenian chronicle, once confessed to seeing angels in the bathhouse steam, massive glowing figures instructing him on matters of war. Was he truly touched by the divine? Or just sipping something a little stronger than wine? You start to notice the details now. The room's walls are inlaid with golden tesserae, tiny cubes of mosaic that shimmer in strange patterns when the lamplight shifts. They don't seem random. In fact, they seem to be moving. You blink. No, they're still. But for a second, they weren't. The patterns might just be art. Or maybe they're maps. Maybe this whole room is some kind of ancient code. A lady-in-waiting drifts by, her gown whispering across the tiles. She's humming a low, breathy tune that feels oddly familiar, like something from childhood, something sung to you in a fever. Her eyes meet yours for a fraction of a second, and they're too wide, too still. She's floating, you realise. Not literally, but close. The line between thought and speech, dream and waking. It's breaking down in here. Fringe fact time. A little-known Byzantine medical manual discovered in fragments lists a preparation called wine of mercury. It contained no actual mercury, thankfully, but it did include extract of a nightshade, aged with cinnamon bark and figs. It was used supposedly to soften the soul before judgment. Some historians argue it was used in confession chambers. Others think it was administered before major decisions, giving rulers a brief sense of omniscience or delusion. Take your pick. Back in the chamber, the air is getting heavier. Not hot, just full. Like every breath carries weight. You sit down, uninvited, and no one protests. You're starting to get the sense that being seen doesn't matter here. No one's fully here. The Empress begins speaking again, telling a story about a river of mirrors, and how if you drink from it you forget your name but remember all the names of the stars. You're not sure if she's quoting something or inventing it on the spot. It's beautiful. It's terrifying. It's nonsense. It's everything at once. And yet, there's danger here too. These potions weren't exactly FDA approved. Doses varied. Reactions did too. Some courtiers whispered about nobles who drank too deeply and never came back, not dead, but trapped in some kind of walking trance. Emperor Justin II was said to have suffered melancholic delirium, waving to non-existent crowds, singing to invisible choirs. Was it madness, or an extended trip gone sideways? Scholars still argue, as usual. The Empress sighs, her shoulders droop. She's done talking for the night. Her attendants gather around her like petals folding inward, dimming the lamps one by one. You stand, or at least you try. The room sways gently. Or maybe that's you. You leave the goblet behind, half finished. It's enough. You've seen what this court has to offer, and you've tasted it too. You step back into the corridor. The marble beneath your feet feels slick, like you're walking on a frozen lake. The air is cooler again, and quieter. You breathe in deeply, and the heaviness lifts, slightly. The glow of the court fades behind you, replaced by flickering torchlight. So much elegance, so much control. And yet, even here, in the most ornamented empire on earth, people were slipping away, floating on herbs and wines and whispered prayers. Not to escape, at least not always, but maybe to touch something more, something behind the curtain. You press onward, your thoughts tugged between memory and dream. You don't walk into the next court, you arrive. One moment you're winding through torchlit stone, and the next, the walls dissolve into painted screens, bamboo floors, and the gentle clink of porcelain. The air is warm, but not stifling. Just the kind of warmth that comes from decades of perfectly practiced hospitality. You've landed in China, under the rule of the Yuan dynasty. Kublai Khan sits somewhere not far from here, dressed in gold-threaded robes, flipping through dispatches from the edge of the empire while sipping something brewed so strong it makes tea look like child's play. This is a place where even the air smells like ceremony. Jasmine, charcoal, burnt amber. You're led down a lacquered hallway by a silent servant who gestures toward a side chamber. Inside, low cushions circle an elaborate bronze brazier, and around it sits a small gathering of men, scholars, advisors, minor officials, and one noblewoman draped in silk so vibrant you swear they hum. They're passing around something long and carved from jade, a thin pipe, its tip glowing like a firefly. Here, you learn quickly, the name of the game is moderation, or at least the appearance of it. Opium is still centuries away from the brutal grip it'll later have on China, but the groundwork is already being laid, quietly. These aren't opium dens with collapsed figures and empty bowls. These are salons, circles of thinkers who call it yan kao, the smoke herb. They call what they're doing a contemplation ritual. You watch one man puff, hold, and then speak a line of poetry so precise it sounds rehearsed. It wasn't. That's just how they are. Historically, the Yuan dynasty wasn't exactly built on subtlety. These were Mongols, after all, who took the Chinese throne, and then promptly began collecting every luxury they could find. Kublai loved lavishness. Palaces with fountains that ran with wine, towers lined with ivory, and guests from 100 different nations. And with this openness came an influx of foreign substances, Persian poppy extracts, South Asian cannabis blends, even Syrian incense sticks laced with euphoric resins. You sit beside a merchant with gold rings on each finger. He nods at you, then tilts the pipe in your direction. It's rude to refuse, so you don't. You inhale gently, and the room tilts just a little. The wood grain in the floor begins to ripple. The faint background hum of a gujeng becomes layered, like a dozen strings all vibrating through your chest. And in that moment, you understand why these men, these so-called scholars, spend their nights here instead of at the court debating land taxes. A scroll is unfurled. Painted on it is a scene of a crane walking across a misty lake. One of the men gestures to it and murmurs, "You see, that's the part of the soul that remembers the wind." Another nods solemnly, as if that sentence makes sense. Maybe it does, right now. Let's throw in your historical fact of the night. Marco Polo, when writing about his time in the Mongol courts, made subtle but unmistakable references to the herb vapours used during feasts and philosophical gatherings. He didn't name them, probably out of caution, but his descriptions of rooms filled with peaceful laughter and slow circular speech don't leave much to the imagination. What's interesting, and still debated among scholars, is whether the Mongol court used these substances as tools of diplomacy. One theory suggests that certain regional governors were deliberately offered euphoric herbs during their initial audiences, softening their resistance, making negotiations feel like dreams. Were they being drugged? Not exactly, but they were being gently steered. Meanwhile, fringe records from a Persian envoy describe a Yuan noblewoman who smoked a mixture of camphor and powdered blue lotus, an Egyptian plant known for its mild hallucinogenic properties. According to his account, she would greet the moon as if it were her husband and spend hours whispering into bowls of water. Whether he made it up to impress his sultan, or was truly witnessing something real, no one's been able to confirm, but you kind of hope she existed. She sounds like a vibe. Back in the chamber, the room has grown quieter. The pipe makes its way back to the brazier, now just glowing embers. The merchant beside you has dozed off mid-thought, his fingers still forming a gesture from a story he was telling. The noblewoman stares at the ceiling, where someone has painted clouds in swirling red and gold. "They don't move when you look at them," she says softly, "but they do when you stop. And somehow, you get it. There's something deeply different about this court's approach. You've seen royals chase escape, drown in indulgence, use substances to erase themselves. But here, it's different. This is ritual. This is theatre. A performance meant not to forget the world, but to change how you see it. Still, there are risks. The line between enlightenment and confusion is thin. Imperial documents later describe a minor prince who, after a particularly strong pipe session, believed he was a dragonfly and leapt off the palace balcony. He survived, barely, but spent the next 5 years communicating only in riddles. He later became a favourite at court. Of course he did. There's debate even now among historians. Were these quiet gatherings true spiritual quests? Or were they just indulgences wrapped in silk and poetry? Was this a court of visionaries or escapists with too much time on their hands? No one really knows. The Yuan left behind massive monuments, impressive trade records, but also whispers. Whispers of the cloud smokers, as one disgruntled bureaucrat called them. The coals hiss as a few drops of scented oil are added. A servant begins fanning the air, sending cool waves over everyone's skin. One by one, the guests rise, bow, and vanish through side doors. It's over. The ritual has ended. The smoke is clearing. You step outside into the palace garden. Crickets chirp. A moon hangs low over a reflecting pool, so still it looks painted. You take one last deep breath, and the remnants of spice and smoke retreat from your lungs. You feel clear. Not sober exactly, but calm. Like someone rearranged your thoughts while you weren't looking. The East has its own way of getting high. Not loud, not reckless, but no less potent. You head back toward the darkness, another court waiting. By now the night has curled itself around you like a thick wool cloak, weighted, a little itchy, and carrying the faint scent of campfire and pine. You're somewhere colder now, the wind sharper, the stars clearer. The architecture here isn't ornamental, it's functional. Thick beams, stone slabs, fur-covered benches. You can hear the ocean just beyond the hill, crashing against rocks like it's trying to remember something. You've landed in Norse territory, Viking lands, and tonight you're not in a palace or a court but a longhouse, smoke darkened, fire lit, packed with warriors, skalds, and one extremely high king laughing so hard he nearly drops his drinking horn. This isn't your average medieval monarch. He's got braids in his beard, blood on his tunic, and a massive grin stretching from cheek to cheek. He's been drinking mead laced with something that absolutely shouldn't be legal, if legality were a thing here. You glance around. The atmosphere is electric. Every cup is overflowing. The fire in the central hearth spits occasional sparks like it's in on the joke. Welcome to the court of King Harold Greyskin, or someone like him, depending on which saga you choose to believe. The high of choice tonight: mushrooms, and not the kind you toss in stew. Amanita muscaria, those little red-capped, white-speckled beauties often drawn in fairy tales, grow in these northern woods like weeds. And let's just say the Vikings didn't only eat them on accident. They figured out that drying them reduced the nausea and boosted the euphoria. The berserkers, those legendary shirtless warriors who foamed at the mouth before charging into battle, were said to trip hard on these things before fights. The idea was that fear becomes impossible when you've forgotten what it is. But here in the Longhouse, the king isn't preparing for war. He's preparing for story time. He waves for silence, lifts his horn, and starts a tale about a serpent made of clouds who promised him invincibility after he danced naked on a frozen fjord. The whole room loses it. Someone falls backward off a bench. A dog barks at the wall for no reason. It's easy to think of Vikings as brutal, grim warriors, but there was laughter here too, and apparently hallucinogens. One Norse saga, usually glossed over by historians trying to keep things PG, mentions a red feast, where guests spoke with birds and wrestled trees they mistook for gods. Sounds like a good time or a warning label, possibly both. You're handed a carved wooden bowl. The liquid inside is thick, sweet, and smells vaguely of forest floor. You take a sip. Honey, moss, and a distant hint of panic. You brace yourself, but nothing hits right away. These things creep, and you know by now that creeping highs are the most dangerous kind, the kind that don't knock but just quietly take the wheel. A man next to you starts humming, low and rhythmic. A skald. Picks up a lyre and plays a tune so old it doesn't feel like music anymore. It feels like wind remembering a story. And then it happens. The fire pulses. The carved dragon heads along the beam seem to breathe. You look down at your hands and swear they're not yours for a moment. Just borrowed gloves from some other version of you. Historical fact time. Archaeologists have found Viking drinking vessels with residue that points to herbal mixtures far beyond just mead. Juniper berries, wild mint, yarrow, and yes, fungi. The Norse had a relationship with the natural world that wasn't about control. It was about negotiation. If a plant could give you insight, or madness, or strength, it was respected, even feared. The king finishes his story with a sudden howl and slams his horn down, spraying mead across the fire pit. Everyone cheers. He leans back, sighing, and mutters something about the dream of Valhalla being a hallway with no doors. People nod like this is the wisest thing they've ever heard. Maybe it is. You're too deep in the fog now to tell. A fringe account found in a much-ignored 14th century Danish manuscript describes a Norse queen who brewed mushroom tea not just for fun, but for divination. She'd drink it, stare into a bowl of water, and dictate messages from beyond the ice. Were they hallucinations or visions? Even her advisors weren't sure. But some of her predictions apparently came true, including the death of a rival chieftain who laughed at her. Never laugh at a tripping queen. Noted. Meanwhile, scholars are still wrestling with the berserker mushroom theory. Some insist their rage came purely from adrenaline and ritual. Others argue there's just too much overlap between the reported symptoms: superhuman strength, pain resistance, and a tendency to scream at trees, and the known effects of Amanita muscaria. The debate rages on, but tonight, the mushrooms win. Back in the Longhouse, things are starting to spiral. Someone is playing two flutes at once. A warrior tries to wrestle a wooden column, insisting it owes him silver. The king is now curled up with a wolfskin cloak, telling it that it's the only one who understands. You blink, and for a moment the shadows seem to lean in closer than they should. You're not afraid exactly, but reality is wearing a looser tunic than usual. You take a step toward the door, needing air. Outside, snow falls in slow spirals. The stars burn brighter than you've ever seen. The cold cuts through your days just enough to feel real again. Behind you, laughter echoes, mingling with drum beats and nonsense songs. You've stepped out of the myth and into the freeze. The Norse didn't use these substances for escape. They used them for transformation, for battle, for prophecy, for art, for storytelling that bent the world sideways. And you? You were just lucky enough to catch one of their weirder nights. You walk away from the longhouse, the snow crunching, under your boots, the high slowly loosening its grip. But some part of you stays behind, next to the fire, next to the king, frozen mid-laugh, dreaming of cloud serpents and fjords that sing lullabies. There's a warmth returning to the air, but it's not from the hearth this time. It's tropical, fragrant, almost dizzyingly alive. You're in India now, though the exact century feels slippery. Somewhere between the late 12th and early 14th, the land is ruled by a Raja with a fondness for poetry, elephants, and the occasional transcendent beverage. You walk through courtyards that burst with mango trees and lotus ponds, brush past hanging marigold garlands, and step into a marble pavilion shimmering under monsoon clouds. Incense coils from stone burners. Flute music dances in the air like dragonflies, and somewhere nearby, a servant is grinding fresh cannabis leaves into a brass bowl. This is the land of bhang, a preparation made from cannabis mixed with milk, rosewater, nuts, and spices. It's not hidden, it's sacred. The people here don't see it as an escape, they see it as a bridge, a way to step closer to the gods, to open the mind and calm the heart. Religious festivals feature it, poets swear by it, ascetics drink it before meditation, and yes, the royalty indulge too, especially this particular Raja, who is currently lounging in a swing suspended from the ceiling by golden chains, sipping from a jade cup and murmuring something about time being a lazy tiger. You find yourself invited, expected almost, to join him. The servant offers you a cup without a word. You accept. The taste is strange but pleasant. Earthy, creamy, with a strange aftertaste that tingles like laughter. The Raja gestures to a cushion across from him. You sit. He's staring into the distance, as if watching something play out across the clouds. The sun is late today, he says. Probably got lost again. You nod because, yeah, maybe it did. The effects are gentle at first. You feel your body relax, your breath slow. Sounds become crisper, more deliberate. You notice the way the flute bends each note, how the pigeons on the windowsill seem to coo in a rhythm that makes too much sense. The Raja is still talking, spinning stories about talking cobras and philosophers who argued with banyan trees. You're not sure which parts are metaphors and which are just Thursday. Let's dive into a historical note. Cannabis use in India dates back over 2,000 years, referenced in the Vedas as one of the 5 sacred plants. It was used in religious rituals, medicine, and recreation alike. Bhang wasn't a fringe practice, it was institutional. Certain Hindu sects even encouraged its consumption during holy festivals like Holi or Shivratri, seeing it as a way to open oneself to divine connection. Royal households had their own versions of the recipe, often adding ingredients like saffron or sandalwood to elevate the experience, because if you're going to get high, you might as well do it with class. A fringe fact. One Sanskrit poem describes a king so devoted to his bhang rituals that he created an entire court position, royal stirrer of the sacred paste. This man's job, day in and day out, was to ensure the cannabis was ground, mixed, and served with the right mantra. Apparently he once received a jewelled turban for his efforts. Occupational goals. Back in the pavilion, the Raja has switched from storytelling to philosophy. Time, he says, is not a line, but a peacock. You don't even try to decode it. It's not that kind of conversation. You're deep in the haze now, but it's not the kind that fogs you. It's more like a widening. You begin to notice how the wind moves through the silk curtains, how the water in the nearby fountain makes tiny prisms when it catches the light. The edges of reality are just slightly blurred, like you've dipped the world in watercolour. But here's the thing, it's not just for fun. The Raja sees this as necessary, a balancing act. He's a ruler, sure, but also a thinker, a dreamer. He tells you that once a week he comes here to listen to the world whisper. And what does it whisper? Mostly complaints, he admits with a grin. But occasionally it sings. Scholarly debates continue about just how widely bhang was used in medieval Indian courts. Some argue it was more ceremonial, limited to festivals and religious events. Others point to records showing that royal physicians prescribed it for anxiety, pain, and even insomnia. There's mention of a Maharaja in Rajasthan who kept a daily journal, half court gossip, half philosophical rambles, and it's widely believed he wrote most of it under the influence of a particularly potent bhang blend he referred to as the Green Guest. Unverified, but the handwriting gets noticeably weirder halfway through each page. The Raja offers you a second cup. You politely decline. He chuckles, appreciating your restraint, or maybe just amused that you still think you have free will. A parrot on a perch overhead begins reciting what sounds like a poem, something about mangoes and mortality. The Raja nods solemnly. He understands, he says. Eventually the shadows stretch across the floor, and the servants begin closing the shutters. The sky turns pink, then purple, then something without a name. The high isn't sharp. It fades like perfume, leaving warmth and a kind of soft emptiness behind. The Raja stands slowly, his silk robes rippling like water, and says, "I must go judge a poetry contest, or maybe a mango-eating contest. I forget which." He walks off, humming to himself. You remain seated for a moment longer. The pavilion is still, quiet, perfumed. You feel lighter, like your thoughts have been rinsed clean. Maybe that was the goal. Not escape, not ecstasy. Just a chance to reset. A break from the burdens of empire and identity. Outside, the courtyard blooms, with the scent of jasmine. You take one last look at the swing, the jade cup, the bird still muttering verse to itself. Then you walk out into the humid dusk, another thread woven into the global tapestry of royal indulgence. In India, the high isn't hidden. It's holy. The quiet is thick when you re-emerge. Not peaceful, thick, like cotton stuffed into the cracks of the world. You're somewhere colder again, higher in elevation. The stone under your feet is darker, the corridors narrower, tapestries hang limp against damp walls, and there's a stillness in the air that hums just under the surface, like something's off, but no one will admit it. You're in Castile now, early 16th century, and the castle belongs to Queen Joanna, though here most call her something else, Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. But what they don't say, not out loud, is that madness has many flavours, and not all of them come from the mind. You enter her private quarters, or what's left of them. The furniture has been moved into corners. The mirrors are covered with cloth. Candles burn low but never go out. She's not here right now. She's in the chapel, they say, whispering prayers to a husband who's been dead for years. Or maybe she's asleep, or walking the halls barefoot, muttering to ghosts. Depends who you ask. The stories about her change like weather, but what doesn't change is this. Every apothecary that served under her reign kept unusually detailed notes about mixtures, syrups, herbs, imported oils, tinctures from Flanders, poppy seed infusions from the south. One report mentions her drinking a nightly, soporific cordial of violet and hemp, stirred into honeyed wine. Another lists henbane drops for disquieted mind and trembling vision. None of it was strictly outlawed. Most of it was recommended. But when mixed, and taken too often, well, the mind begins to float, and float too far. You finally find her, curled in a chair by the window, staring into a night that doesn't appear to be offering her much back. She doesn't startle when you approach. Her fingers grip the armrest like it's keeping her from drifting away entirely. She's dressed in mourning clothes, black, layered, suffocating, and at her feet, a small brass tray, 3 empty cups, 1 half-full bottle of something dark and glossy. Her cordial, you suspect. She speaks suddenly, voice low and papery. He visits sometimes, she says, but not as he was. He hums now, always humming. She doesn't explain who. You don't need her to. Everyone knows she adored her husband, Philip the Handsome, and when he died young, maybe from illness, maybe poison, something in her shattered. Or so the story goes, but here's where it gets messy. Because what if she wasn't mad? Or not fully? What if the medications, the tonics for nerves, the elixirs to calm her wandering humours were doing more than anyone intended? Some scholars now believe Joanna may have suffered from postpartum depression. Others argue bipolar disorder. But there's another camp, smaller, less official, that suggests the very people trying to heal her were quietly sedating her into passivity. And worse, calling the side effects symptoms, fringe fact of the night. One court record references a mysterious figure known only as the Flemish pharmacist, a man who visited the Castilian court several times under various names. His concoctions were said to soften grief and lengthen sleep. He disappears from history shortly after Joanna's confinement began. His existence isn't widely acknowledged, but if real, he may have been one of the first quiet architects of pharmaceutical power in European royal courts. She speaks again. The bells? They lie. They tell me it's morning, but I know it's not. You don't correct her. The room feels timeless, like you're stuck in a clock that only ticks backward. The shadows on the wall haven't moved since you arrived. Or maybe they have, in ways too subtle to track. Let's pivot to the politics for a second. Joanna's father, Ferdinand, and later her son, Charles V, both had vested interest in keeping her unavailable. As long as she was officially mad, she could not rule, she could not resist, she could not interfere, and so she was locked away for decades, fed potions, given treatments, left to sit in her velvet prison while Europe moved on without her. Her hands move now, tracing something invisible in the air, a pattern, a memory. Her eyes flutter. There was a garden, she says, almost to herself. There was music in the leaves. I think I heard it once. She trails off. The wind taps gently at the shuttered window, but no one moves to open it. There's no laughter in this high, no wine-drenched poetry or mushroom-fueled prophecies. This is the dark end of indulgence, the place where medicine becomes manipulation, where grief is dosed into compliance. And still, there's something tragically beautiful here. A woman clinging to memory, to love, to whatever splinters of self she can still find between the syrupy fog of her royal regimen. You step back quietly, unwilling to disturb her further. The air outside her chamber feels sharper, like it's been waiting to breathe again. Behind you, she whispers something you can't quite make out. Maybe a prayer, maybe a name, maybe nothing. History remembers her as the Mad Queen. But madness, you're starting to see, is sometimes a convenient label. Sometimes it's the side effect of losing too much, feeling too deeply, and being too powerful in a world terrified of powerful women. You walk away slowly, feeling the weight of it. The clink of glass on brass, the velvet folds of night, and the taste of honeyed wine lingering on a tongue that was never yours. The road turns dusty beneath your feet now, the clean-cut stone of castles replaced by sun-baked trails and creaking saddles. You're travelling, not resting, bumping along with a small band of men who look like they've been riding for months and sleeping like rocks. Their armour is scuffed, their banners sun-bleached. These are Crusaders, returning from the Holy Land, tired, sunburned, and hauling back more than just relics and rumours. You blend in easily enough, tucked beneath a borrowed hood, a flask at your side, and a pouch of something pungent swinging at your belt. You're not headed to a palace this time. You're riding with knights who've seen miracles and massacres, and aren't entirely sure which was which anymore. Their stories are vivid, chaotic, and as the sun dips low and the horses slow to a trot, one of them finally unslings a small leather satchel and says, "All right, let's see what the holy herb can really do." The others chuckle like it's an inside joke. You realise quickly that tonight won't be about prayer. This is where things get strange. The Crusades weren't just military campaigns. They were massive cultural exchanges. And while much of what came back was stained with blood or dogma, some of it was green, fragrant, and very much alive. Hashish, in particular, made its way from the Islamic world into Europe tucked in saddlebags sewn into cloaks, or simply shared in the quiet hours between battles by men too exhausted to care about blasphemy. Tonight, the group makes camp beneath a cypress tree. The sky above is vast, a dome of stars that seems to pulse. A fire crackles to life, and from that satchel, the night, clearly not new to this, produces a curved pipe, a small ceramic jar of dark resin, and a flint. No ceremony, just routine. You watch as he heats the bowl, takes a long drag, and exhales something that smells sweet, earthy, and oddly spicy. He passes it around. No one refuses. One knight, barely 20, and with a face too young for the scars it holds, begins to hum under his breath. Another strips off his breastplate and lies flat on the ground, arms splayed, whispering. I can feel the earth breathing. No one mocks him. They all understand. Hashish was known to some Crusaders as herba mirabilis, the miraculous herb. It dulled pain, quieted nightmares, let them forget what they saw in Antioch, or Acre, or whatever corner of hell they'd barely limped out of. And for some it was more than an escape. It was a portal, a strange, smoky doorway to a reality where none of it had ever happened, where they weren't killers, where the blood had never dried on their swords. Your turn comes. You take the pipe, inhale gently, and the world softens. Sounds pull apart like taffy. Firelight turns to golden syrup. The leaves above shimmer like tiny stained glass windows. The nights begin to tell stories. Real ones, maybe. Or just hashish-fueled visions. A tale of a dog who walked into a mosque and came out glowing. A vision of the Virgin Mary dressed in chainmail. One man swears he spoke with a lion who told him to go home and become a beekeeper. That one gets a genuine laugh. Here's your historical breadcrumb. While European chroniclers often wrote in vague terms, Middle Eastern sources were clearer. They accused Crusaders of indulging in local pleasures under the guise of diplomacy, hashish, wine, and sun-tempered women, as one text delicately put it. But the herb was what stuck. Knights started crafting crude pipes, mixing their smokes with wine, even rubbing the resin into wounds as a kind of magical balm. It wasn't just about getting high. It became a kind of grim sacrament. Fringe fact: one knight, Hugo of Montferrat, reportedly claimed to have received a divine message while high on hashish, instructing him to abandon the crusade and open a hospice in the Alps. He did exactly that, and the hospice still stands today, though no one advertises the hashish part. Scholars have long debated whether these stories are exaggerated. Some argue the hashish tales were invented to discredit the Crusaders' discipline. Others point to archaeological finds, pipes, scorched bowls, resin traces in flasks, that suggest real, widespread use. The truth is probably a hazy middle. Some men saw it as sin, others as salvation, and many as simply the only way to sleep through the screams. Back at the campfire, things have slowed. A knight strums a lute, the same 4 notes over and over. Another is weeping quietly, holding a coin between his fingers like it's the only thing anchoring him to earth. The leader, the one with the satchel, sits with his back to a tree, eyes closed, murmuring something in Latin that sounds suspiciously like a nursery rhyme. You look around, and for a moment, you see them not as warriors, but as broken boys pretending to be steel. The high strips away the myth, the armour, the holy fury. What's left is fear, and humanity, and a little laughter. Eventually the fire dims, blankets are pulled over shoulders, the pipe is tucked away, and in the hush before sleep one voice whispers, "Do you think God ever gets tired of watching us?" No one answers. It's not that kind of night. You drift a little ways off, lying on your back, staring up at a sky that refuses to stay still. The stars shift subtly, drawing patterns only you can see, shapes that make no sense, messages from something older than crusades and kings. You let them wash over you. In the end, you realise this herb wasn't about glory or sin. It was about endurance. A thin thread of comfort in a world that had ripped open. Something to hold when nothing else made sense, and so the nights sleep. Not dreaming of Jerusalem or God or even home, but of silence, of peace, of a world they might have imagined under that tree lit by firelight and wrapped in smoke. The world has gone quiet again, but not the soft, reverent quiet of a court before a king enters. No, this is the heavy, sick kind. You're in a city gripped by the Black Death. Somewhere in Central Europe, mid-14th century. The streets are empty, doors are marked with chalk, and the bells never stop ringing. Everything smells of vinegar, smoke, and desperation. You walk past shuttered windows and silent bakeries. No children laughing, no vendors yelling, just the echo of your own footsteps and the slow creak of a cart carrying someone no longer breathing. You duck into a side alley, trying to get out of sight. This isn't a safe time to be wandering around, and it's definitely not the moment to be snooping around royal chambers, but that's exactly where you're going. Because even in the midst of pestilence, some people manage to live in an entirely different world. And those people? They're up in the manor house, sipping poppy syrup and pretending the world outside isn't crumbling. You reach the heavy wooden door. Guards glance at you, barely alert. The sickness hasn't touched this place. Yet. You enter. Inside, it's warm, perfumed, and entirely disconnected from the hell outside. Rich tapestries hang on the walls as if fabric could somehow block out death. The nobles here walk slowly, not out of grace, but because their limbs are heavy with laudanum, the fashionable medicine/escape hatch of the era. And at the centre of it all is the Countess. She lies on a divan beside a roaring fire, face pale, hair coiled like a gilded question mark. Her goblet glitters, filled with what looks like red wine but smells faintly of poppies and something medicinal. You recognise the look in her eyes. Not panic, not grief, just softness. Not entirely here. Poppy syrup, known to medieval apothecaries as diacodium, was everywhere during the plague. Sold in markets, brewed in monasteries, recommended by physicians. It was said to ease pain, settle the nerves, and help the sleepless drift away from their dread. In theory, a medicine. In practice, a coping mechanism. And in some cases, like this one, a preferred way to spend the apocalypse. She notices you but doesn't flinch. Instead, she tilts her head and says, "It's all just smoke now, isn't it?" You nod. Smoke is all anyone has. The air is thick with incense, rosemary, myrrh, and burnt orange peels. The theory was that sweet-smelling air could protect you from the plague, and maybe, on some level, it did. If not the disease, at least the terror. You take a seat across from her, and someone silently brings you a small cup of the same syrup. Thick, sweet, and floral, like drinking a funeral bouquet. You sip slowly, your throat tingles, and then the edges of the room start to blur. Not spin, just soften, as if the fabric of reality is letting go a little. Let's talk history. The Black Death wiped out an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population between 1347 and 1351. Mass graves overflowed. Priests stopped answering doors, and nobles, those who could afford it, barricaded themselves inside their estates and tried to wait it out. Some turned to prayer, others to indulgence, and many to the dreamy comfort of opium-based concoctions. Laudanum wouldn't be officially named for another few centuries, but the base was already here. Wine or spirits steeped with poppy extract, sometimes laced with herbs like valerian or nutmeg. One fringe account buried in a letter between two Florentine nobles describes a group of courtiers who refused to wear masks, carry posies, or observe any of the necessary precautions. Their reason: the juice of the sleep flower, as they called it, would shield them, not from illness, but from the awareness of it. If death was coming, they said, let it find them dreaming. The Countess beside you begins to hum softly. Her eyes drift toward the fire, reflecting gold. "The dead are quiet," she murmurs. "They don't argue anymore. Maybe we should join them." You can't tell if she means it literally or if she's just deep in the syrup, probably both. There's a doctor at the far end of the hall sitting on a stool and scribbling notes. Not about treatments, about reactions. He watches his clients float, drift, nod off mid-sentence. He's refining dosages. He's not cruel, just curious. Medicine in this era wasn't clean. It was experimental. A little opium might ease pain. A little more might silence a grieving mind. Too much? Well, then you didn't have to worry about the plague at all. A historical debate still rages. Did poppy-based concoctions help or hinder during the pandemic? Some argue they kept people calm, allowed physicians to treat without panic. Others say they numbed whole cities into passivity, delaying containment efforts and spreading the disease faster. There's no clear answer, only shadows. You close your eyes for a moment. The hum of the fire, the scent of poppy and ash, the weight of history pressing gently against your ribs, it all melts together. You see flashes, carts rolling, hands reaching, a child's doll abandoned in the mud. And then none of it matters, because the syrup wraps itself around your thoughts like velvet and tells you it's okay to forget. Just for a bit. The Countess laughs suddenly, too loud. "I had a dream I was a bird," she says, "but I never flew, just sat in a tree judging everyone." The room chuckles politely, too slow. Everyone's lagging a beat behind. Time has gone syrupy too. Eventually a servant opens a window. The outside air wafts in, damp, cold and achingly real. A dog barks in the distance. A bell tolls again. You take one last sip. The warmth lingers in your chest, but the rest of you is already beginning to fade back toward yourself. As you leave the manor, the contrast hits like a slap. Outside, the world is still rotting, but inside, the nobles lie swaddled in velvet and poppy dreams, waiting to see if death remembers them. And you keep walking, because tonight's journey doesn't end in sleep. Not yet. You hear him before you see him. Not a royal fanfare, not a decree, echoing through the halls, just laughter. Rolling, unguarded, absurd laughter, the kind that bounces off castle walls and makes servants stop and glance at each other like, is he at it again? You follow the sound through a Bohemian fortress so extravagantly strange it looks like someone tried to build a monastery, an opera house, and a carnival all in one. The tapestries are mismatched, the sculptures seem to be laughing along with the voice, and the corridors twist like they were designed by someone who definitely wasn't sober. You've entered the domain of Wenceslas IV of Bohemia. Not the good King Wenceslas from the Christmas song. No, this is his descendant, ruling in the late 14th century and known for being, well, let's say, difficult to manage. He's sprawled in a throne made of carved oak and lined with velvet, a crown cocked at an angle, cheeks flushed, eyes dancing. In his hand, a glass of something green and dangerous. You're not sure if this is absinthe, not yet. But it's close, an herbal spirit made from wormwood, anise, fennel, and a bunch of things no one with a functioning liver should be drinking by the pint. And Wenceslaus isn't sipping, he's guzzling it like water from the Holy Grail. Around him, a ragtag group of artists, alchemists and professional flatterers raise their own glasses trying to keep up. He spots you and grins. "Ah! A new philosopher!" he booms, waving you closer. "Tell me, why do frogs never pay taxes?" Before you can answer, he slams his glass down and cackles, because they croak before the collectors arrive. The room erupts into applause, either out of loyalty, drunkenness, or sheer survival instinct. Here's where the weirdness hits a new level. The drink he's pouring is no ordinary spirit. It's a royal concoction, distilled by court alchemists who dabbled in everything from perfume to poisons. Wormwood, the infamous herb in absinthe, was known even then to cause strange effects when consumed in large quantities. Hallucinations, euphoria, confusion. It wasn't illegal, not yet. In fact, it was fashionable, particularly among royals looking to escape the crushing boredom of rule and the constant pressure to act like they had any idea what they were doing. Tonight's beverage, Wenceslaus informs you, is named Laughing Saint. Whether that's a joke, a metaphor, or a cry for help is unclear. You sit near the edge of the circle. A jester performs something between a dance and a seizure. A musician strums an instrument that looks like it was invented on a dare. The king tosses fennel seeds into the fire for good luck, and then, just as quickly as he laughed, his face shifts. He grows quiet, still. He stares at the green liquid swirling in his glass and mutters, "Sometimes I think I'm already dead, and this is all just the echo." No one reacts. No one breathes. Then the moment passes and he shouts, "Who wants to race snails?" A servant sighs and begins retrieving the box. Let's drop a historical fact in here before your brain melts from second-hand fumes. Wenceslaus IV was indeed known for his erratic behaviour, often blamed on mental instability, political stress or sheer indulgence. He was deposed twice, imprisoned once, and somehow still kept clinging to a crown through pure chaotic inertia. Contemporary records note his fondness for herbal wines and bitter cordials, especially those brewed by his own personal alchemists. One letter from a visiting Italian diplomat describes the court as drenched in a strange green liqueur that whispers nonsense to all who drink it. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Now here's your fringe fact. There's a half-burned Bohemian manuscript that references a substance known as the monk's smile, a highly volatile wormwood tonic supposedly mixed with gold leaf, honey, and a few secret ingredients known only to court jesters and mad monks. It was said to induce not just euphoria, but a sudden rush of ideas. Dangerous, genius, or both. Some claim it inspired entire state reforms. Others say it was responsible for the king attempting to knight a goat. Jury's still out. The debate among scholars today? Was Wenceslaus truly mad, or simply intoxicated for most of his rule? Was his behaviour a result of unchecked substance use, or did he use those very substances as a way to cope with the paranoia, betrayal, and political rot around him? Was he laughing at the world, or just laughing to keep from screaming? You glance at the king again. He's now pacing around a table, assigning astrological signs to pieces of fruit. This plum is a Pisces, sensitive, probably mouldy inside, he says, deeply serious. This apple? Aries, definitely violent tendencies. You realise he might be the most honest man in the castle. As the night winds on, the green drinks keep coming. No one's counting. The king begins to hum, off-key but with purpose. One of the alchemists scribbles notes furiously, likely convinced the king's babble contains the secret to eternal life. You're not sure if you're drunk, high, or just infected by the sheer lunacy of it all, but the room starts to tilt. The colours on the tapestries seem brighter, like they've decided to tell their own stories. Eventually the king drops into his throne with a sigh. "They think I've lost my mind," he whispers, "but really I'm the only one who saw how thin it was to begin with." You believe him. The fire burns low. The jester sleeps in a heap of bells and velvet. The musicians have given up. The bottle of Laughing Saint is nearly empty. You stand and quietly step out into the night, the cold air slicing through the haze. Behind you, a king rules his own tiny kingdom of chaos and hallucination, where everything makes sense, just not to anyone sober, and honestly it's hard to blame him. The laughter fades behind you like smoke dissolving in wind. The world outside is colder now, sharper, with that unmistakable hush of moneyed secrets. You've stepped into France, late 17th century, but this isn't the France of grand processions and powdered glory. This is behind the curtain, the backstage of Versailles. A masquerade not of nobles dancing under chandeliers, but of masks covering more than just faces. You're in the middle of a poudre party, one of those peculiar late-night gatherings where powdered wigs and powdered herbs blend into a fashionable blur of glitter, perfume, and just enough sedative to keep royal anxiety from toppling the throne. You're ushered through a narrow side passage by a valet who doesn't speak, but seems deeply unimpressed by your existence. The door at the end opens not to a ballroom, but to a gilded salon full of cushions, crystal snuff boxes, and a group of powdered aristocrats who look far too serene for people 3 glasses into the apocalypse. The air is dense with rosewater, cinnamon, and something under it all. Something sharper, root-like, and just a little dangerous. You've walked straight into France's forgotten high society drug scene. It smells like sugar and vice. A woman in an impossibly wide gown beckons you over. Her cheeks are rouged to the gods, and her voice is a whisper painted in silver. "You've never tried the rose," she purrs. You assume she's speaking metaphorically. She is not. She produces a tiny box, flicks it open, and reveals a pinkish powder so fine it seems to float of its own accord. "Snuff," she explains, with just a kiss of paradise root. You've heard of snuff before. Ground tobacco sniffed through the nose, a common vice in European courts. But this version, it's been enhanced. The aristocrats here are mixing traditional tobacco with psychoactive herbs from across the globe. Betel nut, powdered datura, even small traces of opium or belladonna. They call it poudre enchantée, magic powder. Royal pharmacists claim it helps with headaches and melancholy, which of course is code for. This will turn your brain into a chandelier for 6 minutes. You accept a pinch. It hits fast. No burn, just an expansion. Your thoughts become velvet ropes uncoiling. The ornate mirrors in the salon seem to flicker, not with movement, but with intention. The faces around you drift, smiling, nodding, powdered into oblivion. One man is reciting Latin backwards, another is tracing the same line on a tapestry like it holds a message. No one questions this behaviour. It's encouraged. Let's dig into some historical truth here. The French nobility were obsessed with their powders. Snuff was technically tobacco, but in Versailles it became an entire culture. Some nobles took it up to 50 times a day. And while most used traditional blends, the elite, especially the eccentric ones orbiting the court of Louis XIV, began experimenting. Apothecaries were bribed to create exotic infusions. And when the Enlightenment hit and science became fashionable, mixing psychotropics into your self-care routine was seen as curiosity, not addiction. Your quirky fact. There's a diary from a French duchess who recorded her daily snuff rituals in scandalous detail. One entry mentions a mixture she called Divine Memory, containing crushed violet petals, tobacco, and what she described as essence of the Turkish poppy refined to snow. She claimed it helped her remember dreams from 3 years prior. She also once tried to flirt with a painting. The line between helpful and hallucinatory was always, shall we say, fluid. Back in the salon, the woman in the wide gown is giggling. Not quietly. Full-on laughter. Head thrown back, powder puff clutched like a weapon. He thinks the candlestick is winking at him, she explains, pointing at a portly duke in velvet breeches who's now apologising to the fireplace. It does that, she adds. Winks. Especially when it's bored. Across the room, a philosopher, identifiable mostly by the stack of badly folded manuscripts at his side, is talking about how time is not linear but layered like millefeuille pastry. Everyone agrees. They don't know what he said, but they like how he said it. Someone passes a new box around, this one glittering cold to the touch, labelled simply La Neige, the snow. You decline this time. Even you know when a powdered party might turn from amusing to too immersive. Here's the open debate still plaguing historians. Were these parties widespread or fringe? Some argue they were limited to small scandalous circles, part of the libertine elite who dabbled in everything. Others suggest the use of enhanced snuff and herbal narcotics was far more common than we think, simply disguised as medical treatment or spiritual remedy. Given the amount of documentation that doesn't exist, it's hard to tell. But between the paintings, private letters, and confiscated recipes, there's enough smoke to suspect a very spicy fire. As the hours melt away, the salon takes on a dreamlike tone. The mirrors stretch slightly. The floor seems to breathe. One noblewoman is trying to read fortunes in the bubbles of her champagne. The fireplace coughs out a strange spark. And someone begins reciting poetry in a made-up language that somehow still moves you to tears. Eventually a bell rings somewhere deep in the estate, either the signal for dawn or just a sound someone paid to have installed, because they liked how it felt in their bones. The guests begin to gather their wigs, adjust their jewels, and drift out of the salon like feathers caught in a draught. No one stumbles, no one speaks too loudly. They're floating, clouded, elegant, lost in their own scented little universes. You exit last. The halls are quiet now, but still scented. Rose, lavender, tobacco, and just the faintest hint of poppy. A footman nods to you in the corridor. You're still masked, still anonymous, still lingering in the afterglow of powdered dreams. As you step out into the pre-dawn chill, your breath curling into the pale air, you realise something about these people. They weren't escaping. They were reinventing, one sniff at a time. Reality too dull? Tweak it. Too sharp? Powder it. Too cruel? Perfume it and laugh. It's not denial, it's aesthetic survival. There's a painting you've seen before, somewhere in a museum gift shop, probably on a tote bag. It's a swirl of colour and madness, a man playing a harp with a fish, bodies tangled in ecstatic weirdness, oversized birds feeding humans berries out of metal spoons. It's Bosch's garden of earthly delights, and you've always thought it looked like a dream someone tried to paint and failed halfway through, which somehow made it more accurate. But now, standing on a mosaic path in the garden of a 15th century Flemish nobleman's estate, you realise it may not have been just a dream at all. It may have been a memory. This place is not a royal court in the strictest sense. The man who owns it is no king. He's a wealthy patron, a collector of oddities, and a dabbler in things no one in the church would publicly approve of. He doesn't rule anyone but himself and a house full of painters, herbalists, poets, and musicians who all look like they haven't had a sober conversation in years. You're handed a goblet before you can even say hello. The drink is green, viscous, and smells like tulips left too long in the sun. The host appears, a wiry man in a cloak stitched with silver thread and embroidered insects. He greets you as if you're an old friend and immediately launches into a monologue about the sacred geometry of toadstools. You nod like this is normal. Because here it is. This is one of many scattered courts of pleasure and strangeness that existed in the cultural soup of late medieval Europe. Wealthy nobles who used their estates as temples to aesthetic experimentation, philosophical hedonism, and quite often hallucinogenic horticulture. You're standing in a garden grown specifically to get people high. Not a theory, not a metaphor, a literal cultivated maze of psychoactive plants, curated for introspective wandering, as your host puts it. You take a walk through it. The path is lined with foxglove and datura, belladonna and henbane. Everything toxic, enchanting or mildly fatal is here, and it's all flowering. Vines curl around sculptures shaped like hybrid beasts. Birds squawk from gilded cages hung at weird angles. You pass a fountain carved like a woman drinking her own reflection. You'd ask what any of it means, but the drink has started to kick in. Your body goes warm. The air becomes thicker but not heavy. You blink, and the colours don't just brighten, they hum. The garden tilts a few degrees left. Or maybe you do. You realise that what's happening is exactly what it's supposed to do. This garden wants you disoriented. One of the staff, a barefoot woman in a gown made entirely of ivy, leads you to a small chamber behind a lattice of trellised vines. Inside are cushions, books, and what looks like a mural of planets swirling into the mouth of a fox. You sit, and she begins to read aloud in a language that sounds like Latin if it had been rewritten during a thunderstorm. It doesn't matter. The tone of her voice folds over you like warm fabric. Let's dig into a historical whisper. While mainstream history focuses on war, politics, and plagues, there was a quieter revolution happening in places like this. A psychedelic renaissance hidden beneath layers of respectability. Certain elite households had private apothecaries, not just for medicine, but for mood. Curated experiences, dream spaces, and spiritual quests facilitated by plant-based substances. The garden you're in now, it's modelled on medieval herbals and alchemical diagrams, where each plant is placed not just for beauty, but for effect. It's a living spellbook. Fringe fact time, a marginal note found in a Flemish manuscript written in a shaky hand on the back of a devotional text, describes a pleasure garden in which the air itself carries songs, and speaks of a night where nobles feasted on dream flesh and wine that bled stars. The entry was unsigned, and no one knows if it was a hallucination, a parable, or an actual event. But it's been cited as possible evidence of noble circles experimenting with controlled psychedelic experiences for spiritual or artistic insight. Back in your current reality, which is growing increasingly flexible, the host returns. He gestures to the ceiling, where coloured glass casts shifting patterns across the floor. This is what God sees, he says, when he forgets himself. You try to respond, but words are lazy now, stretching too far before they arrive. He doesn't mind. He pours more of the green drink. It's made with wormwood and dream seed, he adds, whatever that is. The air in the room ripples. You see shapes in the corners that shouldn't exist. You're not scared. Not exactly. It's more like being inside a painting that keeps repainting itself. Your mind feels soft around the edges, like it's being gently rewritten. The ivy-gowned woman is humming now, and you swear you understand what she means, even though there are no words. Here's the debate among historians. Were these gardens really intended for altered states? Or were they just eccentric landscaping choices made by overpaid artists and lonely nobles? Some scholars argue that the inclusion of so many toxic or psychoactive plants was accidental or symbolic. Others point to the patterns, the deliberate placement of flora, and the surviving recipes found among estate inventories listing ingredients like moonflower elixir and midnight balm. At this point, does it matter? Eventually the garden begins to unwind, not physically, just energetically. The light dulls. The strange clarity you had starts to fade, replaced by the soft itch of your thoughts returning to their usual forms. You step outside the trellised chamber and find yourself back near the entrance. A servant smiles at you gently, placing a cold cloth in your hand. You didn't even realise you were sweating. The host waves farewell with a grin. "Don't worry," he says. "You never really left, and you never really arrived either." You walk out of the estate into a dusk that smells like crushed herbs and secrets. The real world looks flatter now, duller but quieter too. Your mind is tired, but in the good way, like it's been aired out, dust shaken loose. The garden of earthly delights might not have been just art. Maybe Bosch saw this place. Maybe he wandered through it, drink in hand, vision split wide open. Maybe this wasn't his fantasy, but his memory. The mushrooms, the fountains, the fish with faces. And maybe, just maybe, you've been here before too. You don't enter this next place so much as descend into it, like slipping through a crack in history. The stone walls grow older, rougher. The air turns cold, not from climate but conviction. Torches flicker low, and everything smells of damp earth, old wine, and secrets no one ever meant to share. You're in the 12th century now, and the space you've wandered into is deeper than a chapel, quieter than a monastery, and far more guarded than any palace. This is a Templar commandery, or at least the edge of one, and you're about to witness a rite that's been whispered about for centuries but rarely confirmed. The Knights Templar, warrior monks, champions of crusades, guardians of relics, were many things, but behind the layers of vows and oaths, rumours have always swirled about their initiation rituals. What really went on in those underground chambers? Tonight, you're going to find out, because you're standing outside a wooden door with a cross carved into it, and from the crack beneath it seeps a scent that is unmistakably wine, and something else. Something herbal, almost spicy, a scent that feels heavier than alcohol. You push the door open and step inside. The room is dim, lit by iron sconces and a central fire. Around it, 5 knights in white mantles stand in a circle. In the centre is a table, plain wood, but on it sits a single goblet, silver, old, ornate. A figure, clearly a higher-ranking knight, dips a ladle into a brass vessel and fills the cup. He says nothing. The others bow their heads. Then he turns and hands the goblet to the newest among them. The initiate drinks. Silence. Then, laughter. Not loud, not wild, just a quiet chuckle that turns into a soft grin. The others smile too. You watch, amazed, as the knight's shoulders relax. His posture loosens. His eyes blink as if he's seeing light for the first time in weeks. The ceremony continues, words in Latin murmured, but your focus is on that goblet. You edge closer to the brass vessel. Just a sniff tells you this. Isn't communion wine? This is something else. Historians have long argued over the Templars' use of entheogenic substances, those mind-altering plants and concoctions used in spiritual contexts. While no definitive recipe survives, hints appear in accounts from the Holy Land. Herbal infusions, wine steeped in mandrake, spiced draughts with poppy and henbane. Templar documents rarely mention it directly. Oaths of secrecy were strict, but some believe that during initiations they used mild psychotropic infusions to simulate divine vision, calm nerves, or break down identity. After all, a man reborn in the Order must leave behind his former self. What better way than through altered perception? One fringe theory, dismissed by many but persistently fascinating, claims the Templars discovered a Syrian wine laced with blue lotus extract, gifted to them by a Sufi mystic. The flower, sacred to the ancient Egyptians, is mildly psychoactive, promoting tranquility, dreaminess, even euphoria. The Templars supposedly adapted it, mixing it with red wine and nutmeg for ritual use. Some even referred to it as the Cup of Solomon. Whether that's myth or a poetic flourish is anyone's guess. Back in the chamber, the ritual has ended, but the air remains thick. The initiate sits by the fire now, sipping more of the wine and staring into the flames. You sit beside him. He says nothing for a long time, then murmurs, "I thought the veil would lift, but it was never there." You nod, even though you don't fully understand. That seems to be how things work down here. One of the elder knights offers you a cup. He doesn't speak, just holds it out with a knowing look. You take it. It's warm, and not just from the fire. The flavour is complex, deep red wine, bitter herbs, something floral, something metallic. It doesn't hit fast, but it rolls in like fog over a field. Your thoughts go quiet. The stone walls seem less cold. The flickering shadows begin to move in ways you can't quite explain. They're not hallucinations, more like memories, but not yours. You see deserts, horses, blades in sunlight, chanting voices, tears, fire. You look down and your hands are the same, but your breath feels borrowed. You blink and it fades, but not entirely. You begin to understand the appeal of these rites. For nights burdened with war, guilt, faith, and silence, these moments might have been the only place where they were allowed to feel something without consequence. The herb wine wasn't indulgence, it was necessity, a window, a mirror, a bridge between duty and self. There's a debate, of course. Modern scholars love to argue about whether these accounts are exaggerated, fictional, or the result of anti-Templar propaganda after the Order's fall. Some point out that many so-called rituals were fabricated under torture during the Templars' infamous trials. Others counter that the consistency of certain descriptions, dark rooms, ceremonial, wine, visionary states, suggests at least a grain of truth. Perhaps not magic, but definitely chemistry. Eventually the fire burns low. The knights begin to leave, one by one, offering brief nods. No speeches, no grand send-offs, just quiet reverence. You stand, feeling the effects fading, but something lingers. A kind of clarity, like you've heard a truth too ancient for language. The last knight pauses by the door and says, "The cup is never empty. You just have to know where to drink." Then he vanishes into the corridor. You follow. As the stone hallways rise and the darkness behind you closes like a page, you wonder how many more kings, knights, and wanderers found something sacred not in scripture, but in a sip of something strange, something that opened the mind, or closed it just enough. One more secret added to the pile. You're not in a castle this time. You're in a palace. A Vatican palace, to be precise. And if that sounds like a place too sacred, too polished, too holy for what you're thinking, it's not. Not entirely. Because even within these marble halls, with their gilded ceilings and perfectly arranged frescoes of saints gazing down in approval, there's always a door that leads somewhere stranger. The year, late 15th century, the Renaissance is blooming like a well-fed orchid. The Borgia family is in power, if you can call what they do power and not just the world's longest blackmail-laced dinner party. And tonight, you're not visiting a king or a duke. Tonight, you're sitting in the private study of Pope Alexander VI, surrounded by celestial globes, perfumed candles, velvet-draped windows, and, yes, a golden chalice of something suspiciously herbal. This is the Pope who brought nepotism to an art form, fathered enough children to start a mid-sized kingdom, and kept his own flavour of medicine close at hand. Medicine, of course, is what everyone called it. Healing tonics, restorative draughts, infusions for prayerful contemplation. But here, in this room where even the holy air feels laced with incense and ambition, you can smell the truth. The Pope is lounging in an embroidered chair, slippers off, robes half untied, looking not unlike someone who has just had a very long day pretending to be God's emissary on earth, and is now ready to vibe. Beside him, an apothecary in all but name prepares his favourite mixture, wine infused with wormwood, clove, anise, a touch of saffron, and something known only as the bishop's drop. The scent alone is enough to make your skin warm. He turns to you with a sleepy smile. "You can't govern souls," he says, "if your own is too tightly wound." You nod as if this makes sense. It kind of does. He takes a sip and gestures for you to do the same. Let's be historically honest here. Popes, especially Renaissance popes, weren't exactly the embodiment of restraint. The papal court was, at times, indistinguishable from any other European court. Lavish, corrupt, indulgent. Except here, everything was dressed in a silk robe of piety. Medicinal preparations for meditative states were as much a part of the papal diet as wine, bread, and political favours. And Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, he was the master of the double life. He could hold a mass with absolute solemnity in the morning and then attend a banquet of ecstasy and pleasure by nightfall. Some claimed his private supply of herbal elixirs included imported poppy extract, myrrh oil, and even rare lotus paste smuggled through Venetian channels under the guise of church incense. One servant, dismissed in disgrace, accused him of floating into sermons as if walking on dreams. You take your first sip. The drink is warm, smooth, and leaves a tingling trail down your throat. Your vision doesn't blur, but it does soften. The edges of the room round themselves out. The candle flames seem taller, brighter. The Pope continues speaking, now about stars and sins and how some of them are really the same thing. The stars look down, he says, but they don't judge. They're too far away to care. You file that away for later use. It sounds wise, even if it isn't. A historical footnote worth knowing. Medical texts of the time often blurred the line between healing and enhancing. Physicians prescribed herbal tonics not just for physical ailments, but for melancholy, religious doubt, even divine confusion, a sort of spiritual disorientation brought on by excessive contemplation. The treatments, often wine-based, mixed with opiates, herbs, and resins. Most records were cloaked in Latin, sanitized with phrases like elixir tranquillitatem mentis. Translation: a drink to shut the mind up. Fringe fact incoming: an anonymous manuscript in the Vatican archives, catalogued cryptically as Miskmay 178c, includes a recipe for a sacred tincture of saintly sleep, attributed to a Benedictus of Spain. Among its ingredients, wine, nutmeg, wormwood oil, opium resin, and crushed black rose petals. It's marked not for the laity. Someone added a note in the margin, only for those burdened by holiness. That sounds exactly like something Rodrigo would keep on hand. Back in the study, the Pope is now barefoot, humming a Gregorian chant off key, occasionally replacing the Latin with what sounds suspiciously like dirty jokes in Catalan. The apothecary doesn't bat an eye. You realise this is just Tuesday. The religious ecstasy here isn't just metaphorical, it's pharmacological. There's an open window behind him, and through it the scent of Rome seeps in. Dust, olive oil, distant music. He leans back and smiles, eyes closed. Everyone thinks sin smells like sulphur, he says. But no, it smells like jasmine, like this drink, like forgetting, but in a holy way. He offers you more. You decline. There's only so much sanctified daydreaming you can do in one night. The high is soft, warm, cradling. You're not lost, just a little less interested in where the path is going. Scholars continue to argue, were popes truly using psychoactive substances, or were these reports exaggerated by critics who wanted to smear the church? The truth likely lives somewhere in between. But with so many medicinal recipes recorded by Vatican doctors, it's clear the door was open. Not everyone walked through it, but some, like Rodrigo Borgia, held the door wide. The Pope stirs, yawns, and waves you off like a court jester after a decent performance. "Tell them I was praying," he mumbles. "Tell them I saw God. Just don't tell them he looked like a cat." You bow, trying not to laugh. As you exit, the door creaks shut behind you. The corridors feel brighter, the air less heavy. You've just sipped the divine, and it tasted like secrets. The air shifts again, sweeter now, but not in a natural way. This is perfumed sweetness, manufactured, distilled, curated to wrap itself around you like invisible lace. You're in Florence, mid-16th century, and the walls around you practically sweat luxury. You've arrived at the private residence of Catherine de' Medici, Italian nobility turned Queen of France, and a woman whose power was matched only by her perfume. Literally, she didn't just wear it, she weaponized it. And tonight she's not at court, she's in her laboratory. That's right, lab. Beneath the layers of coronets and etiquette, Catherine was a chemist of sorts. Alchemy adjacent, fragrance obsessed, and deeply interested in how herbs, flowers, oils, and occasionally other things could be mixed, distilled, and turned into substances that might change the way a person thought or behaved. You follow a stone hallway down into the cool underbelly of her estate. The smell of roses hits you first, then lavender, then something earthy, smoky, almost medicinal. You're led by a servant in gloves who says nothing but clearly knows the drill. The corridor ends at a door of polished walnut, inlaid with golden lilies. You step through, and suddenly you're in a space that doesn't feel like the 1500s at all. Glassware everywhere, copper alembics, narrow flasks, tiny glass vials filled with liquids in every possible shade of danger, and in the centre of it, Catherine. Dressed not for court but for precision, apron over a silk gown, sleeves rolled up, a vial pinched delicately between gloved fingers. She doesn't look up when you enter. Close the door, she says. You do. The air matters. This is no casual perfume blending session. She's crafting something called l'esprit d'absinthe de rêve, the dreaming spirit of absinthe. You recognise wormwood, of course, and fennel. But there are other things on the table too. Dried violets, an unmarked blue powder, something that looks like pressed mandrake root, and a bundle of herbs you've seen before in a witch's garden. She swirls the concoction into a clear vial, holds it to the light and smiles faintly. This one, she says, is for clarity or chaos. I suppose we'll see. Now here's the twist. Catherine didn't just make perfumes to smell divine, she believed in the psychological power of scent and vapour. Some called her obsessive, others a proto-scientist. Rumours swirled around her for years that she seduced kings with love potions disguised as perfume, that her healing incense caused hallucinations, that she once dosed an entire banquet hall with a mist that made half the guests fall into spontaneous sleep. None of it's confirmed, of course, but the whispers have lingered longer than her legacy as queen. She finally offers you a small crystal bottle, stoppered with wax, etched with a single symbol, a crescent moon. This is not for pleasure, she warns, it's for discovery. You unstopper it carefully. The scent is floral, yes, but there's a sharpness underneath, a bite. You inhale, just lightly, and the room tilts, not dramatically, not cartoonishly, just enough for every surface to look slightly more alive. The copper vessels gleam too brightly. The flames flicker in time with your heartbeat, and Catherine, who once seemed composed and severe, now looks like she's glowing from within, her hair gleaming like polished wine. Focus, she says. Don't let it guide you. You guide it. Let's get historical. The Medici court, and especially Catherine's entourage, included perfumers trained in both aromatic and medicinal arts. She brought several of them with her to France when she married into royalty. What they crafted wasn't just perfume, it was therapy, it was mood shifting, and in more than a few cases it was a step away from alchemy. Recipes from her court include tinctures for sleep, vapour chambers to relieve melancholy, and ointments for visions. Some of these included opium, others belladonna. One particularly rare manuscript, allegedly from her apothecary Renato Bianco, describes a blue vapour created with rosemary, angelica root, and a crystal ground from moonstone. Fringe fact? There's a legend that Catherine created a mirror room filled with vaporized fragrances and reflections designed to split the mind in three. No one knows what that means. But a French noble wrote in a letter to his cousin that he entered that room once and came out weeping with joy for the face of God in my own eye. He died a year later of unknown causes. Nothing suspicious, obviously. Back in the lab, Catherine watches you closely. She's studying your reactions not with the warmth of a healer, but with the intensity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. You're not entirely sure you're still upright, but your mind feels exquisite, focused. You can hear tiny details, wax dripping, the shifting of her slippers on the tile, your own breath slowing. She smiles slightly. Now, she says, ask yourself a question, but don't say it out loud. You do, and somehow you feel the answer bloom in your chest like a vine. Not words, just knowing. You blink, and it's gone. The effect fades. The light returns to normal. Catherine has already turned back to her vials. The bottle in your hand is empty. Was it real, or just very expensive perfume? That's the eternal question around Catherine de' Medici. Was she a queen or a sorceress? A scientist or a manipulator? Were her creations medicine, poison, magic, or just perfume that happened to whisper the right words to the right people? You step out of the lab and into the hallway. The air is colder here, simpler, less intentional. But some part of you remains steeped in the scent, in the moment, in the knowledge that you just inhaled something made to alter perception, in a palace that would rather call it a floral blend. One whiff, and you were somewhere else. One woman, and history still isn't sure what to call her. The walls are sweating, not metaphorically. Actual beads of moisture slide down smooth stone as steam coils around you in warm, fragrant spirals. You've stepped into a bathhouse, but not just any bathhouse. This one belongs to the royal court of Hungary in the late 15th century, nestled in the foothills of Buda, not yet part of the glamorous, bustling twin city you know today. Here, the water is drawn from thermal springs, rich with minerals and seasoned. Yes, seasoned, with herbs and oils that would make a modern spa feel like a kiddie pool. The air is thick, almost soupy, and perfumed with lavender, mint and something spicier, maybe thyme or marjoram. Incense curls from bronze braziers. Marble statues stare down in perfect poses, unmoved by the sight of a dozen royals and nobles lounging in steaming pools, murmuring to each other, or humming to themselves, blissed out and bare as the day they were born. And there, half submerged in a corner pool like a particularly smug sea lion, is the king himself. He's not wearing a crown. He's wearing nothing, in fact, but his beard and a smile that says he's about 3 cups deep into whatever herbal mixture is circulating in this water. His skin glows like he hasn't known stress in years, and his voice, when he calls you over, is so relaxed it practically sloshes. "Come," he says. "The steam is wise tonight." You ease into the water. It's hotter than expected, just on the edge of uncomfortable. But the heat carries something with it, a silky tension that instantly starts melting out of your muscles. Then comes the scent. It's not just mint and lavender, there's something more. Numbing. You glance to the side and see a servant stirring a bowl of crushed herbs with a wooden pestle, then adding the slurry to the steam duct. The vapour thickens. The room spins gently. What you've walked into isn't just a bath. It's a therapeutic ritual designed by a royal court that took its hydrotherapy seriously. Hungary, during this period, was a melting pot of Ottoman, Slavic and Western influences. Bathhouses weren't just for washing. They were spaces of social diplomacy, medicinal treatment, and quietly euphoric recreation. Especially at the royal level. Especially with the right mix of the herbs. Historical note: Hungary's mineral-rich hot springs were famous even then, and the court built elaborate bath complexes where water was laced with oils, flower extracts and powdered resins. Some of these additions were for the skin, others for the mind. Accounts from visiting ambassadors describe steam rooms where the air itself whispered, and where wine was taken not by the cup, but through the lungs. You lie back, letting your head rest against the tile. The steam rises. You breathe in deeply, and everything softens. The sharp edges of thought dissolve. The marble columns blur, as though they're swaying gently in the water. Across the pool, a noblewoman is giggling to herself, stirring the surface of the bath like it's a scrying bowl. Beside her, a bishop stares at a stained glass window like he's receiving messages from the Virgin herself. The king raises his goblet, because of course there are goblets in the bath, and toasts no one in particular. To being clean, he says, inside and out. Then he takes a long sip and sighs like his soul is exhaling. "They say steam is the breath of the earth," he murmurs. "I believe it. This place. It speaks." He's not wrong. The acoustics in the room turn every splash and whisper into something ceremonial. Fringe fact time. One obscure Hungarian chronicle refers to the king's vapours, a blend of 7 herbs mixed into the bath steam of King Matthias Corvinus, designed to evoke gentle clarity and calm amusement. The recipe included valerian root, wild mint, juniper berries, and crushed poppy petals. Yes, poppy petals, not seeds, added to the steam ducts before royal baths. Was it medicinal? Of course. Was it also a very soft, polite high? Almost certainly. Scholars debate whether these bathhouses truly facilitated altered states or simply deep relaxation. But when the herbs used are known sedatives, and the water is hot enough to open every pore in your body, the answer begins to sweat its way out. Some argue that the relaxation itself was a kind of open-eye trance. Others believe that intentional mind-altering effects were sought out, especially when mixed with herbal wine sipped mid-soak. Back in the pool, the atmosphere turns musical. Someone begins to sing, a folk tune lilting and slow. A harp joins in, then a dulcimer. None of them brought instruments in here. You're too steamed to question it. The melody seems to weave through the fog, warm and droning like a lullaby for adults who never get to rest. You feel it in your ribs. The servant returns, this time with a bowl of something else, little dark pellets. The king waves toward them. Crush. Steep. Breathe, he instructs. You'll see stars you didn't know existed. You don't ask what's in them. You've learned better by now. A mix of cardamom, clove, perhaps something a little more mysterious. You inhale as the steam thickens again, and for a moment you swear the lights in the ceiling ripple like stars on water. This isn't indulgence, it's design. The whole bath has been engineered to lower defences, soften the ego, melt the self just enough for peace to find its way in. You realise the king doesn't bathe here for vanity, he bathes here for survival. The court outside is filled with politics, alliances, enemies in robes. In here, the world is too soft to scheme. Eventually the water cools, the fog thins, the goblets empty. Nobles rise from the bath like ancient gods, wrapped in towels and silence. The king steps out last, smiling as if he just solved a problem that plagued him all week. He glances back and says, "You should come back on moonlit nights." The steam sings louder then. You nod, stepping onto the mosaic floor, your skin warm, your mind blank but soothed, like a parchment that's been wiped clean. Sometimes the best high isn't what you drink or smoke. Sometimes it's what you breathe. You've wandered into something wild this time. Not wild like war or court intrigue or absinthe-induced poetry. Wild like mossy stones, flickering moonlight, and a breeze that smells faintly of rain and secrets. You're in Wales, and the hills here are soft, rolling, almost too green to be real, like someone painted them in the dark with memories instead of colour. The trees are thick and low, leaning in like old gossipers, and in the valley between them sits a stone hall lit with torches that refuse to burn steady. They flicker too much, and you're starting to suspect the wind here has opinions. The hall belongs to a Welsh prince, one of those half-mythical royals from the misty parts of history, the kind who shows up in songs more than scrolls. Some say he's descended from Arthur, others say he was raised by druids and speaks fluent owl. No one agrees on his name. Tonight he's simply the prince, and he's about to lead you on a walk. Not the kind that clears your head, the kind that folds it inside out. He greets you without ceremony, barefoot, crowned with what looks like a wreath made of ivy, mistletoe, and something else that seems to shimmer slightly under the moonlight. His eyes are sharp but not unkind. His hands are stained green at the fingertips. And when he says, "Let's take the path," you follow, because that's what you came here to do, even if you didn't know it yet. The path is more of a trail through brambles and roots. The trees close in around you, and soon you're walking by, feel more than sight. The prince hums a low tune, something without words but older than language. After a while you arrive at a clearing. In the centre sits a stone circle, moss-covered and half sunk into the ground. On a flat rock in the middle rests a bowl of something thick and dark and pulsing with heat, even though there's no fire. "This is what the fairies left us," he says, "when they went under the hill." Sure, that seems like a normal thing to say. He hands you a carved wooden spoon. You take a sip. It tastes like the forest floor after rain, like sap and smoke and something that shouldn't be edible but is. Instantly your senses stretch. Not violently, just like elastic left out in the sun. The stars above you double, then triple. You're pretty sure you can hear the grass breathing. The prince sits across from you, grinning. "It's the mushroom," he says. "Well, part mushroom, part other things." Let's pause for a historical detour. Wales, in the Middle Ages, was a place where folklore and reality tangled together like bramble vines. Bards sang of heroes who spoke with trees, queens who vanished into lakes, and magical mushrooms that granted visions or madness, or both. While Christian influence eventually tried to prune those old beliefs, in the deep hills and tucked-away valleys, the old ways stuck. And yes, among them were stories of fairy foods found under certain stones or offered in dreams, food said to make you see other worlds. Today we'd call that a psychedelic experience. Back then it was either a gift or a curse, depending on how long it lasted. Fringe fact, a 13th century Welsh herbal manuscript, The Physicians of Midfi, contains coded recipes with ingredients like oak milk and eye of moon, which some folklorists argue are euphemisms for psychoactive mushrooms and herbs. One passage even warns, "Take not the fairy route too near the solstice, lest you vanish from yourself." Back in the clearing, you start to understand what that warning meant. The prince isn't speaking anymore. He's singing in a language your ears have never heard, but your bones somehow recognise. You're lying flat on the moss now, watching the moon ripple like it's underwater. Trees bend toward you just slightly, like they're curious. Time stretches so thin you can see through it. You see moments, not from your life, but someone else's. Maybe his, maybe hers, maybe some future version of yourself, walking the same path with different feet. Eventually the prince sits beside you and offers water from a deerskin flask. It tastes like metal and mint. The high doesn't crash. It unwinds like fog lifting. You're still buzzing, but the sharp edges return. You remember your name again, mostly. He pats your shoulder and stands. "We don't do this often," he says, "only when the forest asks." You start the walk back in silence. The world feels bigger now, but also simpler, like it rearranged itself while you were lying down. The torchlight from the hall is steady this time, warm, ordinary, as if it's pretending it never flickered. Here's the scholarly debate. Was this just folklore, mushroom rituals, hallucinations filtered through oral storytelling? Some say yes, that the tales of fairy food and dream drinks were just villagers tripping on mouldy rye or misidentified fungi. Others argue that these rituals were intentional, controlled, sacred, that the so-called madness was a journey of the mind, not a malfunction of it, and that the princes who wandered into the woods weren't lost. They were looking for answers in a language the church refused to learn. The prince doesn't say goodbye. He just steps back into the shadows. You're left standing at the threshold of the forest, slightly damp, slightly dazed, and changed in ways no map could track. You walk back into the hall. The fire's low, the servants are asleep. A harp leans against the wall, untouched but vibrating just slightly, as if remembering a song no one played. You sit beside it, and you wait. You awaken, or maybe you never slept, somewhere filled with copper, chalk dust, and the low murmur of voices arguing about nothing and everything. This isn't a palace or a battlefield, it's a laboratory, more like a converted dungeon, really. Dim, echoing and lit entirely by flickering lamps that make every bottle and vial gleam like forbidden treasure. You've crossed into the eccentric heart of the late medieval mind, an alchemist's chamber, funded not by science grants or university boards, but by royal gold and the endless patience of monarchs desperate for transformation. Lead into gold, pain into pleasure, mortality into something else. The ceiling is low, vaulted, streaked with soot. Tables are covered in apparatus that looks more like musical instruments than science. Twisting coils of glass, bubbling beakers, crucibles nestled in glowing embers, and pacing among them is a man in a robe too stained to be ceremonial, muttering to himself and sniffing a handful of herbs like they might speak back. This is your alchemist, one of the many pseudo-scholars who made a living promising monarchs eternal youth, unbreakable health, and, if they were particularly bold, a glimpse at God's true design, all for the low, low price of a private lab and a blank cheque. The king who sponsors him, he isn't here tonight, but you know the type. Someone who wants control over death and time, and who's grown tired of priests giving the same unhelpful answers. Instead he turns to this, a cluttered room full of smoke and possibility, and substances. So many substances. Your eyes land on a small table set off to the side. Unlike the others, it's tidy, clean, almost ceremonial. On it sits a set of vials arranged in a circle around a large open tome. One is labelled Aqua Divina, another tincture of Saturn's mercy. But the one that catches your eye reads Vaporum Angelicum. You pick it up. It's light, slightly warm. The alchemist notices and grins like a man who's just remembered where he left his lunch. That one, he says, was an accident. Most of them are. He invites you to sit. You do, because let's be real, you're not leaving without seeing what that vial does. He takes a small stone bowl, drops in 3 pinches of an unknown powder, pours in the contents of Vaporum Angelicum, and sets it atop a heated plate. It sizzles, then steams. The scent rises. A strange mix of cinnamon, pine, and something sharp and chemical. You inhale, because of course you do, and the room leans gently to the left. Not violently, not sickening. Just enough to make your eyebrows rethink their usual location. The alchemist sits beside you, calmly fanning the vapour toward his own face. The trick, he says, is not to chase divinity. It's to sit still and let it find you. Here's your historical grounding. Alchemists were obsessed not just with gold, but with spirit. Some pursued the elixir of life, others the quintessence, believed to be the 5th element, pure essence, capable of curing disease, halting aging, and lifting the soul. Many of these experiments involved boiling down plants, minerals, and metals into potions or vapours. It wasn't always about drinking. Sometimes it was about breathing. Fringe fact time, an obscure alchemical text from Prague, written under the pseudonym Hieronymus of the Hollow Star, describes a ritual in which highborn patrons inhaled fumes from burning mandrake root and angelica oil, claiming to hear the geometry of heaven. He warns against overuse, noting that prolonged exposure caused a man to forget how doors work. The alchemist is now drawing symbols in the air with his finger. "See," he murmurs. The air listens if you talk slow enough. You believe him. Your thoughts have gone strange, but not foggy. More like slippery. They dart ahead of you, then double back. The room feels vast, infinite, even though you can still touch both walls by reaching out. You glance at the open tome on the table. It's written in a script you can't read, but understand anyway. One page glows faintly, not from ink, from memory. You look away, because the text is making you feel like you forgot something important in another life. You try to speak, and your voice comes out softer than expected. "Did it work?" you ask. "The formula?" The alchemist shrugs. "Sometimes. Depends what you want it to do. One prince saw angels. One saw spiders made of music. One just cried for 3 days and called it enlightenment." The room darkens a shade, not because the lamps flickered, because your perception narrowed. You're in a tunnel now of thought. The vapour clings to your face like velvet, like fog, like fingers. You feel detached from your name, from time, your only awareness, drifting across ideas like a boat across a misty lake. This is not recreation. This is initiation. Eventually the vapours thin. Your breathing slows. The symbols lose their glow. The edges of reality begin to click back into place, like pieces of a puzzle rearranging themselves after someone bumped the table. You blink. The alchemist is cleaning up, humming a tune with no melody. The air smells of burnt sugar and copper. You feel like you've returned from somewhere wide and wordless. You try to hold on to the insights, but they slide away like oil on water. The alchemist waves you off. "Come back if you start dreaming in shapes," he says. That usually means you're ready for the next one. Outside the lab, the castle is silent. Everyone's asleep. Everyone but you. There's a debate, of course. Scholars argue over whether these experiments were just proto-chemistry or early psychedelia. Did the royals funding these labs understand what they were ingesting? Or were they just desperate enough to try anything? Some see alchemy as spiritual science, others as mystical nonsense. But maybe, just maybe, it was neither. Maybe it was the first attempt to translate wonder, and tonight, you were the test subject. You emerge from the alchemist's den feeling like your thoughts have been ironed flat and then folded into birds. But the night doesn't let you rest long. Another summons arrives, this time more formal, more royal. You're back in a proper palace, gold-edged and humming with servants who move like clock hands, never making eye contact. This is Spain, early 1500s, And if the silk marble and unbearable silence aren't enough clues, the looming shadow of the Inquisition is. But you're not here for trials. You're here for a queen. Queen Joanna of Castile, known to history by a name she never chose. Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. She's waiting in a darkened chamber lit only by a single candle and the faint flickering blue of stained glass moonlight. Her dress is crumpled but regal. Her hands are bare. And her eyes, when they meet yours, are sharper than any mine that's ever been called mad. Sit, she says, already holding a silver cup. I don't like drinking alone anymore. You do. She passes you the cup. The liquid is dark, thicker than wine, with a scent like overripe fruit and crushed herbs. It helps me dream, she explains. Or remember. Or stop remembering. It changes its mind every night. You raise it to your lips and pause. Mandrake, she says, before you can ask. Wormwood, poppy, rosewater, and a touch of something my apothecary won't name. A royal sedative. A balm for a woman they didn't understand. Let's pause and be clear. Joanna of Castile was the daughter of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, wife of Philip the Handsome, and heir to a vast empire. But what history remembers is not her lineage, it's her unravelling. After her husband's death, she spiralled into grief so profound the court declared her insane. They locked her away, whispering of delusions, obsessions, nightly rituals. But what they ignored, or concealed, was that Joanna had her own pharmacopoeia, her own medicine, her own way of navigating the unbearable, and now you're sipping from her cup. It's bitter at first, but then soft, floral, numbing. The walls around you stretch just slightly, as if relaxing. Joanna exhales and leans back, her face momentarily peaceful. I don't think I'm mad, she says. I just think I saw too much, felt too much. They never forgive a woman who remembers everything. There's an edge in her voice, but also something weightless. You're both starting to feel it now. The calm, the float, the way reality loosens its laces just enough to breathe deeper. You ask her when she started drinking this. She smiles. The night they took him from me, I stopped crying, started steeping. They think I'm silent because I'm broken. I'm silent because I'm elsewhere. Joanna's elsewhere is not a void. It's a layered palace of memory and hallucination. She describes it softly, like someone explaining a childhood home. Sometimes I see him, not as a ghost, as if we're still there, in Flanders, before they poison the air with God and law. The drink continues to do its work. The candle's flame looks like it's breathing. The stained glass ripples. Her voice becomes echo and thread. Historical fact. In the centuries following her death, apothecaries' logs from Joanna's household were quietly unearthed. They listed preparations of mild tinctures for sleep, most of them containing nightshade derivatives, opium or boiled wormwood, all medicinal by 16th century standards. But dosed just high enough, regularly enough, they'd do far more than lull a queen to sleep. They'd keep her in a state of waking dream. Less threatening, easier to manage. Fringe detail. A private letter from a Castilian nun, discovered in a Jesuit archive, mentions being sent to sit with the silent queen, and describes her as serene, like someone speaking to angels through the window. She claims Joanna offered her a drink that made her see roses blooming from the stone floor. Joanna leans closer to you now. Her breath smells of cloves and honey. Her pupils are wide, luminous. Sometimes the angels come, she says, but they look like old friends, and sometimes I think they're just memory wearing a crown. She's not raving. She's not lost. She's navigating. The scholarly debate still ongoing is whether Joanna was truly insane or simply inconvenient. Was she mentally unwell, or was she grieving, drugged, and politically sidelined by men who found her too sharp and too stubborn to manipulate? The truth is blurry, maybe deliberately so. The line between medication and sedation was thin, and queens had little control over either. You sip again. You feel warmth in your chest, a loosening in your jaw. The room is quieter now. Time has slowed to a syrupy hum. You see shapes in the stained glass that weren't there before. Faces, dancing figures, a crown floating just out of reach. Joanna stands. The gown falls from her shoulders like waves. She walks to the window, stares into the dark. They'll come for me again tomorrow, she says. They always do. But tonight I will be with him, in the blue garden, where it rains honey and no one lies. You rise too, unsure of your balance. She turns to you and places a hand on your shoulder. Her eyes are full of centuries. They'll never write the truth, she whispers. So drink, and remember it for me. You do. You exit her chamber silently, the palace still heavy with secrets. Somewhere behind you, the queen who couldn't be tamed disappears again into her dreams, her kingdom of smoke and memory. And this time, you think, she doesn't go alone. The torches burn low tonight, the sky above split open with stars, too many to count and too bright to ignore. You've left Spain behind, at least geographically, but the fog of royal grief still clings faintly to your clothes. This next place, it feels colder, wetter. You're in Scotland now, mid-16th century, and the castle here is more stone than glamour, more wind than warmth. But inside, tucked deep in its quietest wing, lives a queen who knows how to rewrite the rules. Mary, Queen of Scots. She's young and already legendary. Political hostage, crowned monarch, widow, exile, scandal magnate, and tonight, sitting cross-legged on a cushion, barefoot, and humming as she grinds herbs into paste. This isn't how most people imagine her, and that's the point. You're not in her throne room, you're in her still room. A narrow wood-panelled chamber that smells of salt, sage, and something warm and green. Maybe crushed pine needles. There's a low fire crackling, copper pots bubbling gently, and on the shelves, jars, hundreds of them. Labelled in French, Latin, and the occasional code. You're not entirely sure what half of them would do, and neither is the man standing awkwardly by the door. He's probably supposed to be guarding her. He's also clearly terrified of whatever she's brewing. Mary looks up at you and smiles. Not the smile of a queen, but of someone who's just figured out how to cheat time. Good, she says. You're here. You sit. She offers you a ceramic cup, rough around the rim but filled with something that glows faintly green in the firelight. A little of this, she says, and you'll hear your thoughts walking away from you. You raise an eyebrow. Don't worry, she adds. They come back. Let's dig into the history first before things melt. Mary Stuart was raised in the French court, steeped in perfume, poetry, and all the softer forms of power. But she also had a sharp mind, fluent in multiple languages, trained in courtly diplomacy, and obsessed with herbal medicine. When she returned to Scotland, she brought her books, her still-room tools, and a distinctly un-Scottish taste for botanical experimentation. Among her personal belongings, manuscripts filled with alchemical recipes, tonics for anxiety, infusions for night terrors and waking doubt, syrups made with valerian, rue, lemon balm, and opium poppy, some medical, some mystical. She didn't just use these for herself. She gifted them to friends, enemies, lovers, ambassadors. She knew the power of a tincture wrapped in a silk ribbon. Back in the still room, the drink hit slowly. Not in a crash, but like a tide rising inside your bones. Warmth first, then silence. Not the absence of sound, but a kind of vacuum in your brain. Your racing thoughts slow, then drift, then leave completely. Mary watches you with a satisfied tilt of her head. See? You're floating already. You are. The fire pulses. The ceiling stretches. The copper pots shimmer with faces you don't recognise. Maybe past guests of this little midnight retreat. The Queen doesn't speak again for a long time. Just hums. The tune is old, lullaby-shaped. Your eyes close for a second and you swear you're back in France, then Paris, then fog, then back again. Fringe fact. A Scottish noble once wrote a curious passage in his private journal, claiming that Mary had walked with the moon after taking a holy draught of her own invention, during which she refused to speak English, danced barefoot on the cold stone, and declared that she had seen the end and the beginning shake hands. Most historians dismiss it as metaphor, but the dates align with one of Mary's infamous breakdowns, or breakthroughs, depending on your politics. Open debate time. Was Mary just a curious queen, or did she intentionally use psychoactive herbs to self-medicate? Some scholars argue that her tonics were purely medicinal, while others note the ritualistic care with which she prepared them, every dose measured, every flower harvested at dawn, every bottle wax-sealed and marked with symbols that don't quite match any known language. 1 foot in science, 1 foot in spellwork. The potion you drank has smoothed your brain into satin. You're still conscious, still aware, but time has let go of its usual grip. Mary leans closer, eyes alight with mischief. When I feel trapped, she says, I go here, I go inward. They can take my crown, my land, but not this. She places a small vial into your hand. Take it, she says, for when the noise is too loud. You don't ask what's inside, you already know it's not poison. Later, when the effects fade, the fire now embers, Mary walks you out into the garden herself. The night air is sharp and cleansing. The moon is low, the castle sleeps. She leans against a stone archway and sighs. They'll call it madness, she says, almost too quietly. They always do, when a woman finds her own way to survive. You nod, still floating, still somewhere half between thought and silence. She smiles one last time. Good, she says. Then maybe you'll remember me correctly. And you will. Not as a queen undone by scandal, not as a tragic pawn in a Game of Thrones, but as a woman who brewed her own map through the fog and gave you a taste of it. There's a storm moving in, slow and theatrical, the kind that takes its time but never changes its mind. Lightning flashes in the distance and the wind smells like metal and moss. You're in Bohemia now, near the turn of the 17th century, and this castle isn't warm or golden or especially welcoming. It's built for thinking, not comfort. The corridors echo, the ceilings are too high, even the tapestries look like they're frowning. But up in the tallest tower, yes, the cliché lives, you find a man who isn't entirely convinced the body has to stay inside the mind. He's a philosopher, a mathematician, and at least tonight the court's favourite distraction. His name is Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, but his friends, and his many, many alchemists, just call him Rudolf. That alone should tell you something. He doesn't rule like his peers. He's not interested in war or marriage treaties or hunting stags until they fall over from confusion. No, Rudolf collects ideas, and tonight he's letting you borrow one. You find him in a chamber filled with books, bones, and birds that aren't supposed to be awake at this hour. A raven caws from the rafters. A monkey shrieks quietly in a gilded cage. And in the centre of it all, the emperor lounges in a robe too comfortable to be imperial, sipping from a goblet shaped like a lion's jaw. Do you like mercury? He asks without turning. Tastes awful, but it feels like knowing. Sure. You step closer, and he offers you something far less toxic. A small glass vial with a wax seal still warm in the hand. The liquid inside glows slightly like molten pearl. This, he says, was made by one of my guests, from the East. He called it, well, I couldn't pronounce it, but it's meant to open the parts of your soul that argue with each other. You uncork it. The scent is unreal. Saffron, cardamom, something like cedar but brighter. More electric. You sip. It's thick, honeyed, and immediately grounding, which is strange because a second later the floor seems to tilt like a lazy wave. You'll be fine, Rudolf says, reclining on a stack of unbound grimoires. Probably. Here's where the history comes in. Rudolf II's court in Prague was a hotspot of occult curiosity, home to astrologers, alchemists, philosophers, and charlatans alike. He was obsessed with the mystical arts, collecting everything from grimoires and Kabbalistic texts to devices that might have been clocks or curses, no one's really sure. His patronage pulled together minds like John Dee, Edward Kelly, and countless nameless wanderers claiming secret knowledge from Persia, India, or the dream world itself, and they brought their potions with them. Among the stranger entries in the court's inventory are references to subtle brews, liquid, dawn, and one particularly vague entry labelled only for the nights that won't sleep. Some were probably nothing more than wine with herbs. Others, based on scribbled side notes in 3 languages, may have included psychoactive mushrooms, nightshade distillates, and rare resins imported from regions the emperor couldn't even locate on his celestial globe. Fringe fact. A Jesuit spy embedded in Rudolf's court wrote a secret report claiming the emperor held midnight vision sessions, where guests drank a sacred potion and were then asked to describe what they saw in complete darkness. The responses were catalogued. Some said angels, others shapes of impossible geometry. One man reportedly bit off his own thumb trying to touch the light inside the circle. You're not that far gone, yet, but you are feeling expanded. You can hear the storm outside like it's a conversation just beyond a wall. The books seem to breathe. The monkey in the cage is now silent, eyes glowing faintly. The candle flames twist and dance to a rhythm you don't recall hearing, but somehow recognize. Rudolph rises, swaying slightly, and leads you to a telescope. "Look," he says, gesturing to the dark glass. "We're not meant to rule the world, just to notice it." You peer through, and it's not stars you see, it's thought, shapes, movement, the dance of something cosmic and intimate, and behind it all the faint impression of your own face, overlaid like a watermark on reality. The Emperor sighs. "I drink because the sky won't shut up, and because the body is too small for the questions I keep asking." You believe him. Here's where scholars start arguing, of course. Some say Rudolph was mentally unstable, prone to melancholy, obsession, and erratic behaviour. Others argue that he was simply overwhelmed by the magnitude of his curiosity, that the potions and rituals were less indulgence and more therapy, an attempt to stretch his consciousness beyond the iron cage of nobility. Still others whisper that Rudolph discovered something, that he glimpsed a truth too vast for sanity, and spent the rest of his reign trying to replicate that moment, through potion, prayer, or madness. You sit beside him now, both of you adrift in your minds. You don't speak. The potion is still working, revealing thoughts you didn't know were questions. You see a diagram float behind your eyelids, a circle, a serpent, a mirror. It makes sense in the moment. That's enough. Eventually the storm breaks. The sky cries itself clean. Rudolph stirs. "I think I've solved something," he mutters, then immediately forgets what it was. You smile. You understand. This was never about ruling empires. It was about finding enough silence to hear the whisper beneath the noise, and tonight you've heard it. The storm behind you has passed, but something about the air still crackles, as if the sky hasn't quite decided whether it's finished speaking. You're moving south again now, drawn by heat, not just temperature but intensity. Everything about this next place feels heavier, from the scent in the air to the music in the walls. You're in Italy, Naples to be precise. The year is 1594, and the palace isn't quiet. It hums, even at midnight, like someone left passion simmering on the stove and forgot to turn it down. You've been invited not by a king or emperor, but by someone far more magnetic. Julia, Duchess of Amalfi. She's not a queen in title, but don't let that fool you. In this palace she rules everything from the velvet-curtained halls to the soft sighs behind closed doors. Nobles kneel when she passes. Artists write poems just to be ignored by her. Alchemists offer her recipes. And tonight, you're lucky enough, or foolish enough, to accept her invitation to a gathering she calls La Notte del Fiore Silenzioso, the night of the silent flower. What could go wrong? The room is dark, long, candlelit in a way that flatters everyone and reveals nothing. Velvet drapes hang like shadows, and lute music floats through the space like it forgot where it started. The air is heavy with perfume, real and metaphorical. You see men and women draped across cushions, eyes half-lidded, mouths curved into private smiles. Laughter echoes without context. The air smells of orange blossom, wine, and something sharper, faintly bitter, almost metallic. Julia sits at the centre of it all on a couch shaped like a seashell, hair unbound, eyes like polished onyx. She beckons you with a finger and offers you a cup made of glass so thin it seems to vibrate. You take it. The liquid inside is a golden pink. It glows faintly in the candlelight, smells like fruit and fire, and has the consistency of warm honey. "Sip slowly," Julia says. "The flower is quiet but never kind." Of course you sip. Your mouth tingles immediately. Your chest warms. Then something in your skull softens like pressure releasing from a sealed jar. You sit back, and suddenly it feels like the entire room is inhaling with you. Historical pause. This is the tail end of the Renaissance, when science, sensuality, and subversion all found ways to coexist under the guise of refinement. Court society in Naples was famous for its hedonistic salons, lavish, semi-secret gatherings that blurred the line between philosophy, art, ritual and soft-focus rebellion. And yes, there were substances. Recipes hidden in cookbooks, passed by couriers, or encoded in embroidery patterns. Women like Julia, wealthy, educated, untouchable by polite scandal, had access to the best of them. One particularly obscure account from a physician named Benedetto dell'Isola describes a substance called l'estrato del fiore cetacei, a preparation made from blue lotus, poppy sap, rose oil, and a pinch of something called limetta della luna, moon lime, a plant thought to grow only in volcanic soil and harvested by moonlight. He called it a tonic for sorrow and revelation, though not always in that order. Back in the salon, the floor no longer feels flat. It ripples gently under you, like you're reclining on a calm sea. The faces of the guests shimmer faintly at the edges, like oil paintings warmed too long. Someone across the room is reciting poetry in a language no one else seems to speak. Another guest is weeping softly, staring into a goblet as though it's telling her a sad story. You glance at Julia. She's reclining now, eyes closed, lips parted in something between ecstasy and deep concentration. Her fingers trace invisible patterns in the air. It's not a drug, she says. It's a door. It opens something that most people lock away as children. She opens one eye and studies you. Are you seeing it yet? You nod, although it is hard to describe. The room is quieter now, not silent, just full of a deeper stillness. You can hear your own breath, the rustle of silk, the distant creak of a window catching a breeze. Then, layered underneath, something else. Music. A hum. No, it's thought, moving like smoke. Ideas not your own, emotions not your own. 1,000 lives brushing past yours like wind in a crowded plaza. You're not tripping, you're communing. Julia hands you a peeled fig soaked in the same golden liquid. You eat it without thinking. It's so sweet it's nearly electric. Then she asks, what would you ask of the flower if you knew it would answer, you think? You wait. And then the answer arrives, not in words, but as an image, a memory you never had, unfolding with impossible clarity. A child holding a broken mirror, a man standing in the sea humming a lullaby, a woman walking through a field where the grass bends toward her instead of away. It means something, or maybe it doesn't. But you're crying now, quietly, like it's a secret only your body understands. The room keeps changing. You're no longer sure how long you've been here. Hours, minutes. Julia strokes your hair once, gently, like a cat confirming you're real. Don't fall asleep inside the vision, she says. You might forget which self is yours. And just like that, the effects begin to fade. Not sharply, gracefully, like the tide going out. You find yourself upright again, surrounded by people whose faces no longer shimmer. The music is still playing. Julia's cup is empty. She's smiling like someone who just watched you read your own soul out loud. Here's the debate. Were these flower nights actual psychedelic rituals, or just over-decorated wine tastings with too much poetry? Official records mention nothing, but dozens of anonymous writings, diaries, love letters, satirical plays, describe Neapolitan salons where nobles consumed infusions that silenced the inner guards, and where guests reportedly left different than they arrived. Not wilder, not broken, just widened. You stand. Your limbs remember how to move. Julia presses the empty cup into your hand. Keep it, she says, so you don't forget it happened. You step out into the corridor. The candles flicker as you pass, as if bowing goodbye. You're not high anymore. You're just deeper. And the flower isn't silent at all. You're still listening. Morning arrives without warning. No rooster, no bell, no trumpet. Just a sudden, sharp awareness that light has returned and you're once again vertical. Your body remembers walking, though you don't recall when you stood up. You're in a carriage now, rattling slowly down a muddy road lined with trees so tall they look like they're trying to escape the earth. The driver is silent. The horses don't seem real. And inside the compartment with you, wrapped in a velvet cloak and smelling faintly of myrrh and something darker, sits your next guide. She doesn't introduce herself. Not because she's being rude, but because she assumes you already know. Anne of Denmark, Queen Consort of James VI of Scotland and later James III of England. The woman most historians try to describe with words like cultured and extravagant, but who tonight, well, this morning, looks more like someone who knows exactly how many layers exist between here and the truth, and how to slip between them when no one's looking. "I hate mornings," she says, pulling her hood down and handing you a flask. "Drink. It helps." "You do? Of course you do. It's not wine. You were expecting wine. It's thicker, colder, like peppermint and cloves blended with something that sparks behind your teeth." You blink, and for just a second, your breath fogs inside the carriage like it's winter in your mouth. "Mint and belladonna," Anne says casually, like she just told you the weather. "A whisper of blue flag root. The Danes use it during ceremonies. The Scots think it's witchcraft. The English, well, they think everything is witchcraft." She's not wrong. This carriage ride isn't taking you to a palace. Not exactly. It's headed toward a hunting lodge in the woods near Windsor, a place chosen not for its comfort or political importance, but because it's far enough from anyone important to ask questions. And Anne isn't here to entertain you with small talk or gossip. She's here to invite you into the theatre of her mind. The real one. You arrive as the sun is cresting the trees, burning through mist in golden columns. The lodge is quiet, empty. You step inside and everything is ready. Candles lit, tapestries drawn, hearth glowing with a strange bluish flame. Anne moves like she's been here 100 times. Maybe she has. She sits you in a low chair made of black walnut and gestures for you to drink again. "The first time," she says, "I did this during a masque. Everyone thought I was acting, but I was listening." Listening. To the threads, she says, of the world. Anne of Denmark was not just a queen who liked masks and jewels. She was deeply spiritual, raised Lutheran, flirted with Catholicism, fascinated by astrology and symbolism. She commissioned elaborate performances layered with allegory, mythology, and references so obscure they confused even the scholars. But some of those masks, historians now suspect, weren't just for show. They were experiments. The drink begins to deepen its roots. You feel it curling into your stomach, whispering up through your chest. The warmth isn't comforting, it's instructive. Your vision sharpens, but your thoughts begin to melt. Anne steps into the centre of the room and begins to move. Slow, elegant gestures that look like dance but feel like language. You recognise symbols, though you can't name them. Fire, eye, river, thorn. She's not performing. She's summoning. Let's talk context. During her time in England, Anne was known for sponsoring art and poetry, but behind the curtains she was also exploring more arcane paths. Personal letters reference the circle of breath, visions brought by holy fire, and a syrup of silver poppy she received from a Danish mystic. There's even a court record that notes she once retired from a banquet early because the spirits had made themselves too plain. Make of that what you will. Fringe fact. A now-lost masque written for Anne's private court, described in passing by Ben Jonson, was said to include a scene where the Queen herself vanished in a spiral of light and reappeared moments later holding a mirror of broken time. No known explanation was ever given. Back in the lodge, you're watching Anne trace a circle in the air with her fingers. Inside the circle, things move. Not hallucinations, not quite. More like echoes you can see. An image of the Thames at dusk, a child with violet eyes, a procession of stars falling one by one into a bowl of water. The visions come quickly now, some joyful, some terrifying, all impossible. Anne kneels in front of you. Her eyes gleam. "It's a conversation," she says, "but most people are too loud to hear it. That's why the drink is necessary, to quiet the body." And indeed, your body's very quiet now. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't ache. It just is. You ask her if she ever sees the future in these sessions. She laughs. Only fragments, and never clearly. It's like watching lightning inside a jar. The scholarly debate about Anne's use of altered states continues to be polite, vague, and frustratingly dismissive. Was she just eccentric, a patron of artists and mystics, or did she truly engage in visionary practices, guided rituals, infused potions, experimental performances designed not just to entertain, but to open new doors of perception. There's no proof, of course, but there are too many footprints in the fog to say she never walked there. The session ends as gently as it began. No crash, no sorrow, just a soft reweaving of the senses. Anne offers you a slice of quince soaked in rosewater and something faintly medicinal. You take it, still silent, still echoing inside from whatever you just experienced. You'll remember, she says, but not all at once. It comes back in the wind. Outside, the sun has fully risen. The air is sharp and alive. Anne walks with you to the carriage, then stops. This world was not made for silence, she says. We have to steal it, sip by sip. You board. She waves, already vanishing into the trees. And you? You hold the silence in your chest like a crystal that hums only when no one is watching. You don't need the crown to feel it. Just the right drink and the right guide. By now, you know the signs. The flicker at the edge of vision, the way sound starts to feel more like suggestion than fact, and that soft, slippery sensation in your brain like someone untied your thoughts and gave them permission to roam. You've gone from candlelit salons to haunted towers to underground labs and royal bedrooms. But now, at the edge of this long, strange journey, you find yourself in a place so quiet, so clean, it almost feels suspicious. The marble is polished, the columns soar, the silence hums. You're in Constantinople, the year is 1452, and this is the last breath of the Byzantine Empire. The emperor, Constantine VI, is not a man of leisure or indulgence. He's a soldier king, a weary leader with 1,000 years of history clinging to his robes like dust. But tonight he's not holding court or sharpening swords. Tonight he's doing something his advisors would whisper about in locked rooms and chalk up to spiritual exhaustion. He's stepping into the chamber of smoke. It's not listed on any map, not marked on any scroll. Hidden beneath the palace, tucked behind a wall that looks like it hasn't been opened in 100 years, is a small chamber carved entirely from black stone. No windows, no throne, just a shallow pool of water, a copper bowl full of smoking herbs, and a carved marble bench stained with age and memory. You're brought here by a single eunuch who speaks no words. He leads you through the corridors, past the mosaics and saints, past men praying for miracles that will never come. The emperor is already seated inside when you arrive, sleeves rolled to the elbow, eyes distant. There's no crown, no guards, just smoke, and the smell of burning resins, labdanum, myrrh, and something sharper that stings your eyes but calms your chest. He motions for you to sit. You do. You've travelled far, he says. Let's see what's left to find. The smoke rises in delicate threads, curling toward your face like it knows your name. You inhale. It's sweet at first, then bitter, then sweet again. Your lips tingle. Your heartbeat slows. The world outside the chamber fades, and the black walls seem to flicker with faint light, not from torches, but from something older. Now let's anchor this in reality. The Byzantine emperors were deeply mystical, even as their empire fell apart. Their orthodox faith ran thick with ritual and incense, and many were drawn to Eastern practices that drifted in from Persia, India, even deeper. There are vague records, mostly buried in monasteries, that describe the emperor's breath, a ritual involving the inhalation of sacred vapours used for prophetic dreams and divine guidance. Were these religious visions, or something more mind-altering? Hard to say. The ingredients were never written down. But the term holy smoke wasn't just metaphor. Fringe fact: a 15th century monk's commentary, found centuries later in an Anatolian monastery, describes a room under the palace where the air itself could bend the soul like heated gold. He called it Nephili Theo, the cloud of God. He claimed one emperor saw the Virgin Mary's shadow curl around the stone like mist. He also claimed that those who inhaled the smoke for too long heard voices that didn't stop when they left. Back in the chamber, Constantine closes his eyes. I come here when I no longer believe myself, he says, when the crown feels like iron instead of gold. His voice is softer than you expected, less imperial, more intimate. You feel your thoughts begin to loosen again, but this time it's quieter, more reverent. The smoke doesn't knock, doesn't shove, it invites. You follow it. The chamber changes. You see Constantinople as it was. Golden roofs, doves in flight, priests singing in the Hagia Sophia as light falls like honey through stained glass. Then the vision shifts, and you see the city burning. Cannons thunder. Men scream in Latin and Turkish. The walls fall. The emperor fights, then vanishes. Some say he died. Others whisper he lives in marble, waiting. You open your eyes. The emperor is weeping silently. His shoulders rise and fall with no sound. You realise this isn't a ruler's ritual. It's a confession booth for a man who can no longer bear his own reflection. He looks at you, eyes red, smoke curling around his face. "This isn't about escape," he says. "It's about remembering how to kneel." You sit together in the smoke for what feels like days or maybe minutes. Time isn't useful here. You see images behind your eyelids, tombs opening in reverse, cities rebuilding themselves from dust, a falcon flying backward into a sky that's already dark. Eventually Constantine stands. He walks to the shallow pool, kneels, and cups the water in his hands. He drinks, then turns to you. "When the city falls," he says, "they will call it the end. But in the smoke I've seen what comes after, and I'm not afraid." You want to speak, but you don't. You just nod. He walks past you and disappears into the dark corridor without another word. You sit in the silence, surrounded by smoke that is more than smoke. It knows something you don't. Here's the debate historians never settle. Did Constantine truly engage in mystical practices? Did he inhale sacred herbs in a secret chamber beneath the palace? Or is that just the myth whispered by monks and embroidered into bedtime tales for imperial children? The records are vague, the evidence thin, but the truth? It clings like incense to old stone. You leave the chamber changed, the smoke still in your lungs, the images still unfurling behind your eyes, the emperor's voice still echoing in your chest. You followed 25 royals through powder, potion, pipe, and prayer. And this final breath of an empire in twilight, feels less like an ending and more like a bow. So now, you're here. Somewhere between myth and memory, past the fog of velvet-lined courts, cracked lip goblets, poppy-sweet potions, and the countless nights lit by flame, not sun. You've walked beside monarchs and madmen, queens wrapped in lace and lavender, emperors who breathed stars, and princes who whispered to their own hallucinations. You've seen golden thrones and smoky dens, delicate powders folded into lace cuffs, wines that bled like rubies, roots ground into dust that turned the soul sideways. And what do you have to show for it? A little second-hand enlightenment. Maybe a floating feeling just behind your ribs. Maybe a reminder that power, no matter how many jewels it wears, is still just a human thing. A trembling, fragile, hopeful thing. The crowns may have been gilded, but their wearers were just people. Aching, curious, reckless. They weren't getting high because they were bored. They were getting high because the world was too sharp, too loud, too massive to hold in a mind alone. So they turned to rituals, to herbs, to steam, to flame, to smoke. Some called it medicine, some called it madness, some never called it anything at all. And you? You've been along for the ride. Maybe you thought royalty meant dignity, control, cold stares and marble busts. But now you've seen the other side, the silk pillows stained with spilled tinctures, the nights spent in rooms spinning gently, the kings who dreamed they were birds, the queens who cried into their brews and saw goddesses in the steam, the truths they chased, not to escape the world, but to remake it, just briefly, in their own image. So if you're lying in bed right now, eyes half closed, breath slow, wondering what was real and what was just bedtime illusion, that's perfect. That means you're doing it right. You made it. And don't worry. When the morning comes, you'll still be you. Just a little wider, a little softer at the edges, like someone who's seen too much and is better for it. Now sleep well. You've earned it.